Elon Musk was sitting in his sleek, glass-walled office at SpaceX, the expansive Los Angeles skyline stretching out before him. His thoughts were occupied with the constant whirlwind of work that defined his life, preparing for upcoming space missions, pushing forward with Tesla's latest innovations, and, of course, managing the unrelenting media attention that came with being one of the wealthiest and most influential people on the planet. For most people, such a day would have been overwhelming, but for Elon, it was his normal. The phone on his desk buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced down, expecting it to be one of his engineers or a colleague from Tesla, but instead, the name on the screen sent a chill down his spine. It was a call from Greenland, a place he had little to no personal connection with, yet the number had been saved in his phone under a single cryptic name, unknown source. His heart skipped a beat. Why would anyone from Greenland be calling him? His mind raced through possibilities, but none seemed to make sense. His finger hovered over the answer button. He had a feeling that this call would be anything but ordinary. "Hello." Elon answered, his voice steady but laced with a quiet curiosity. "Mr. Musk," a gravelly voice replied from the other end of the line, "I hope you're sitting down." Elon felt a shiver run down his spine. The man's tone was urgent, almost ominous. "What is this about?" Elon asked, trying to remain calm. "I have information about your son," the voice continued, causing Elon's pulse to quicken. "Something that you need to hear. It's something you won't believe until you hear it from us." Elon's mind immediately began racing. His first instinct was to dismiss it as a hoax. But there was something about the tone in the man's voice that told him this wasn't just some prank. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice now more firm. "You need to come to Greenland. Now. We can't explain over the phone, but it's about your son, and it's bigger than anything you can imagine." The words hung in the air like an ominous cloud. Elon's thoughts went straight to his children, his son, XAEA-12, and the complicated, often strained relationship he had with them. He wasn't a typical father, constantly busy with his companies, and he knew that his children often felt the absence of his presence in their lives. But what could possibly be happening in Greenland that involved them? Why Greenland? What could possibly be happening there? Elon asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "You'll understand when you get here," the voice said, before hanging up abruptly. Elon sat there, staring at the phone in his hand. He knew he had to take this seriously, but part of him still wanted to dismiss it. What could someone in Greenland possibly know about his son that he didn't? The more he thought about it, the more questions arose, each one more unsettling than the last. A rush of conflicting emotions washed over him. Was this some sort of blackmail or a scam? Or was there a deeper, more personal connection that he didn't understand? The idea that his son was at the center of something bigger than he could comprehend made his stomach churn. Elon leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to unfold. His instincts told him that he couldn't ignore this call. Despite his hectic schedule and the constant demands on his time, this was something he couldn't just leave unanswered. After a long pause, he made his decision. He picked up his phone again and dialed a number he had never thought he'd need to call. "Hey, it's Elon," he said when the line clicked open. "Get me a private jet to Greenland, as soon as possible." The following day, Elon found himself aboard a sleek, private jet, the hum of the engines the only sound as he sat in silence, staring out the window at the vast expanse of sky. His thoughts kept returning to that phone call, the mystery surrounding it, and, most of all, the bizarre connection to his son. What could be so urgent that someone from Greenland would call him about his child? He had no family ties there, no deep connections with anyone in that part of the world. But the seriousness in the voice of the caller made it clear that there was more at play here than mere coincidence. As the hours passed, Elon's anxiety grew. He wasn't used to feeling this way. In the world of rockets, electric cars, and artificial intelligence, he had built an empire by relying on logic, reason, and a steady hand in the face of adversity. But this, this felt different. It felt personal. By the time the jet began its descent toward Greenland, Elon was already bracing himself for whatever was to come. He had never been to Greenland before, and the barren, ice-covered landscape that stretched out before him felt alien, almost otherworldly. There was something haunting about it, something that made his stomach twist. He landed in a small town, the kind of remote location that most people would consider inaccessible. The cold air bit into his skin as he stepped out of the jet and onto the frozen ground. A dark, overcast sky loomed overhead, casting the entire scene in a gloomy, almost surreal light. As he made his way into the small building that had been arranged for his arrival, Elon couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was about to be revealed, something that would change everything he knew about his son and, perhaps, even about himself. Inside, a man was waiting for him. He was tall, dressed in heavy winter gear, and his face was partially obscured by the shadows of the room. Elon felt a sudden pang of unease, but he pushed it aside. He was here now, and there was no turning back. The man greeted him with a curt nod. "Mr. Musk, thank you for coming," he said in a low, steady voice. "We have much to discuss." Elon nodded in return, his mind racing. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew this conversation was going to be unlike anything he had ever encountered before. "Please," the man continued, "come with me. We have something to show you." Elon followed him through the dimly lit hallways, his curiosity gnawing at him. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though he were walking into the unknown. He had always prided himself on understanding the world around him, on being able to solve problems with a combination of science and innovation. But now, he felt like he was entering a mystery, a puzzle that no amount of technology or intelligence could solve, at least, not yet. "Are you ready for the truth?" the man asked, as they reached a door at the end of the hallway. Elon looked at him, his heart pounding in his chest. The gravity of the situation had finally sunk in. Whatever was behind that door was about to change everything. With a deep breath, Elon nodded. "Yes," he said. "Show me." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The door creaked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the cold, sterile hallway. The room beyond was dimly lit, with walls lined in a mix of high-tech equipment and faded photographs, giving it an eerie, almost abandoned feel. Elon's eyes quickly adjusted to the low light as he stepped inside, his breath visible in the frigid air. The man who had led him there didn't speak a word as he motioned for Elon to follow him further into the room. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with an unspoken tension. There was something off about this place, something that didn't quite sit right with Elon, though he couldn't pinpoint what exactly. Elon's mind raced. What had he gotten himself into? Why had they brought him all the way to this remote corner of the world? He thought of his son, XAE-A12, back home. His relationship with his children wasn't exactly a picture-perfect one. He had always been a father in theory, supporting them financially, providing for them, but his demanding career often left him absent in the emotional ways a parent should be. His thoughts shifted back to the call. Whoever it was on the other end hadn't been wrong when they said it would be something he wouldn't believe until he saw it for himself. But what could it be? What did they know about his son that he didn't? His heart rate quickened. Could it be related to something genetic, something tied to his past that he hadn't even considered? As they walked further into the room, the man stopped in front of a table covered with documents, photographs, and several old, weathered files. "These are the things you need to see, Mr. Musk," he said, his tone heavy with gravitas. Elon approached the table, but the documents were unlike anything he'd ever seen before. They weren't government reports or scientific data, it was personal. His heart skipped a beat as he saw familiar names and details, some of which he could have sworn were linked to his family. "Is this about my son?" Elon asked, his voice betraying a slight edge of impatience. The man nodded but said nothing further. Elon's curiosity, combined with a growing unease, spurred him to grab the first file. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing what seemed to be a history of sorts, chronicling the events and connections that had inexplicably tied his family to Greenland, and more disturbingly, to his son. The file contained photographs of his son, XAE-A12, photos that Elon didn't recognize. They were old, black and white, and they seemed to span across a period of time that didn't align with anything Elon knew. There was one photo in particular, XAE-A12, no more than 5 years old, standing beside an unfamiliar woman in what appeared to be a remote Greenlandic village. Elon's mind raced as he looked at the picture. The woman in the photo was clearly older, but there was something strangely familiar about her, something that made Elon's gut tighten. It took him a moment to realize what it was. She resembled a distant relative of his, a family member he hadn't seen in years, someone whose name he hadn't thought about in a long time. The file continued, detailing strange, unexplained events that seemed to be connected to his son, events that raised more questions than answers. How could XAE-A12 be involved in this? What did Greenland have to do with any of it? Elon, I need to know if you're prepared for what comes next, the man said, breaking his silence. He had been watching Elon carefully, studying his reactions. This is bigger than you might think. Elon closed the file, his mind spinning. He looked up at the man, meeting his gaze. What's bigger than this? What is all this about? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured to another set of files on the table. These are from your past. From before you were even born. Your family's connection to Greenland goes back decades, centuries, even. Your son, he is a part of something much larger than you realize. This is why we needed you to come. Elon felt a sharp sting of confusion mixed with a twinge of anger. What are you talking about? My son isn't a part of some legacy. He's my son. He's just a boy. The man's expression darkened, and for the first time, Elon saw a flicker of something unsettling in his eyes. Your son is far more important than you think, Elon. His existence isn't just about being your child. It's about what he represents. And it has everything to do with what's been hidden from you. Elon's head was spinning now. His breath came faster. What are you saying? Who are you people, and why do you know this about my son? Before the man could answer, the door to the room suddenly creaked open again, and another figure stepped in. This time, it was a woman, dressed in similar heavy attire, her face partially obscured by a fur-lined hood. She walked toward the table without speaking, her presence almost as imposing as the man's. Elon, she said in a soft, yet authoritative voice. We've been waiting for you. Her words struck a strange chord in Elon. Waiting for me, he repeated. What are you talking about? The woman set a thick folder on the table, sliding it toward him with an almost deliberate motion. This is why we've contacted you. You're not just here because of your son. You're here because of you, your bloodline. Your family has been intertwined with Greenland's history in ways you couldn't possibly imagine. And now, your son, he's at the center of it all. Elon's heart pounded in his chest, a deep sense of dread building within him. This wasn't about business, rockets, or cars. This wasn't even about the world he knew at all. No, this was something much more personal, much more dangerous. He slowly opened the folder, his fingers trembling as he pulled out a letter. The letter was old, written in a language he didn't recognize, and it seemed to carry an ancient weight to it. As he read the words, the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. His family's connection to Greenland wasn't a coincidence. It had been planned for generations. And his son was the key to something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. Elon set the letter down, his mind reeling with the implications of what he had just read. The weight of the moment hit him hard. For the first time in his life, he felt completely out of his depth. This wasn't just a family secret, it was a legacy, one that had been waiting for him, for his son, to uncover. But the most chilling thought of all was this: whatever it was, it had already begun. Elon sat motionless for a moment, the letter lying before him on the table. The words seemed to blur before his eyes as he tried to comprehend the magnitude of what he had just read. His mind was struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation, like trying to grasp a shadow that was constantly slipping through his fingers. The woman and the man watched him silently, waiting for his response, their expressions unreadable. Elon couldn't tear his eyes away from the letter. It felt like a bridge to something ancient, something buried deep within the fabric of his family's history. What did they mean by your bloodline? What role had his ancestors played in all of this? Mr. Musk, the man spoke up, his voice low, almost reverent, you are more connected to this than you realize. Your family's legacy isn't just about wealth or business. It's about power. Influence. The kind of power that reaches far beyond what the public ever sees. Elon's breath caught in his throat. He lifted his gaze from the letter to the man's face. The sincerity in the man's eyes made Elon feel like he was staring at something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Power. Elon repeated, the word tasting strange in his mouth. What do you mean? What power are you talking about? The woman stepped forward, her eyes hard but filled with a strange empathy. Your family has been tied to Greenland for generations. There are things here, things that have been passed down, rituals, knowledge, secrets, that most of the world has forgotten. But it's all been waiting for you. Your son, XAE812, is the key. You might not understand it now, but you will. The connection you have with Greenland isn't just about land or resources. It's about something far more elemental. Elon shook his head, the disorientation creeping up on him like a fog. Are you suggesting that my family is part of some secret society? That there's some kind of ancient power that's been passed down through the generations? The man nodded gravely. It's not just a society. It's a lineage. Your ancestors played their part in shaping this world in ways that have been concealed from history. The things that have been hidden, those are the things that are surfacing now. And your son, he is the one who will unlock it all. Elon couldn't grasp what they were saying. Everything about this was so far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Power. Secrets. A hidden legacy tied to his family. It was all too much. His life, his carefully structured, logical world, was suddenly being torn apart by revelations that made no sense. And this, legacy, Elon said, finally pushing himself to his feet. What does this have to do with me? What am I supposed to do with this information? The woman placed her hand on the table, leaning slightly toward him. It's not just about what you do with this information. It's about what your son does. You've spent so much time focused on building the future with technology and innovation, but your son is part of something much older. And right now, he's in danger. The word danger sent a jolt through Elon's chest. What kind of danger? What do you mean? The woman glanced at the man, who nodded. She took a deep breath before speaking again. There are others who are aware of your son's importance. They want to control him. They want to control whatever power he possesses. And they will stop at nothing to get what they want. Elon's stomach twisted. His mind raced through countless scenarios, but none of them seemed to make sense. Who would want his son? Why? And what power could a 5-year-old boy possibly have? How can I protect him if I don't even understand what's happening? Elon asked, his voice thick with frustration. He clenched his fists, fighting the wave of panic rising inside him. He was a man who had navigated space missions, revolutionized entire industries, and changed the world, but now he felt completely helpless. The man placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. That's why we're here. To help you understand. To help you and your son prepare for what's to come. Elon felt a momentary wave of relief, but it was fleeting. Nothing about this situation was simple. He wasn't dealing with corporate strategy or technological advancements anymore. He was dealing with something primal, something he didn't have the tools to comprehend. I need to speak with my son, Elon said, his voice suddenly determined. I need to understand what he's involved in. I need to know if he's truly at risk. The woman nodded. That's why you're here, Elon. You need to bring him here. He's the key, and you're the only one who can protect him. A few hours later, Elon found himself back in his private jet, this time heading back to Los Angeles. The weight of everything that had happened in Greenland still hung over him like a cloud. He couldn't shake the images of the letter, of the photographs of his son, of the strange, cryptic words that had been used to describe his family's past. But above all, there was one overwhelming thought that kept looping in his mind: what if they're right? He had spent his entire life building the future. Creating companies that would push humanity to Mars. Designing electric cars that would change the way the world used energy. But now, it felt like his life had suddenly shifted into something out of his control. As the jet soared through the sky, Elon knew he couldn't return to his normal life, not now, not without understanding what was happening. His son, XAEA-12, was at the center of this mystery, and if the woman's words were true, he was in grave danger. Elon thought about his son. The sweet, curious little boy who had grown up in the shadow of his father's ambition. The boy who had been sheltered from the complexities of the world. How could he have known that his child was carrying the weight of a legacy that spanned centuries? When the jet landed, Elon rushed straight to his home, a million thoughts swirling in his mind. He was about to come face to face with the most important person in his life, and he needed answers. But as he walked through the door, a sense of unease settled in his chest. The silence in the house was too thick, too quiet. He called for XAEA-12, but there was no response. His heart began to race. XAEA-12. Elon's voice trembled slightly. Suddenly, a voice from behind him called out. Dad, I'm right here. Elon spun around, relief flooding through him. But when he saw his son standing in the doorway, there was something unsettling in the boy's eyes, something that made the hair on the back of Elon's neck stand up. Dad, XAEA-12 repeated, his voice soft. I think you need to know something. I think I know what's happening. Elon's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The truth. And it was starting to unfold. Elon stood frozen in the doorway, staring at his son, XAEA-12. The boy's calm expression felt out of place, as though he knew something monumental that Elon didn't. For a moment, Elon considered running up to him, pulling him into his arms, and just holding him tight, trying to forget about everything else, the secrets, the cryptic warnings, the dangerous powers lurking in the shadows. But that wouldn't solve anything. Not now. Not when his son was at the center of a mystery that was larger than anything Elon had ever faced. Dad, XAEA-12 repeated, his voice steady. You've been asking the wrong questions. Elon's breath caught. The words seemed to hang in the air, charged with an unsettling sense of finality. This wasn't just a conversation between a father and his son. This was a revelation. A moment that would change everything. Elon said, his voice tight with emotion. What's going on? I don't understand. What is this all about? The young boy stepped forward slowly, his gaze unwavering. It was almost as though he could feel the weight of Elon's confusion, and yet, he seemed oddly composed for his age. Elon watched his son closely, wondering how much of this he truly understood and how much was just a strange intuition born from the mystery surrounding them. You know, Dad, XAEA-12 began, his voice now tinged with something older, something that Elon had never heard before in his son. I've always felt like there was something more to our family. Something hidden. I know you've tried to protect me from it, but I've seen things. Things I can't explain. Elon's stomach dropped. This was no ordinary conversation. This was his son speaking with a maturity that seemed out of place. It wasn't the innocent curiosity of a 5-year-old. It was the calm certainty of someone who knew too much. Things like what? Elon asked, his voice barely a whisper. XAE812 looked up at him, his eyes glowing with an intensity that took Elon by surprise. Like the dreams I've been having. I've been seeing visions, Dad. Visions of places, and people. People who are watching me. People who know who I am. People who want to use me. The words hit Elon like a slap across the face. His mind reeled. Visions? Watching? The things his son was saying didn't sound like the fantasies of a child. They sounded like something much darker, much more real. Elon, XAE812 continued, I know about the legacy. The one you're trying to uncover. I don't think you're the one who's supposed to figure it out. I think it's me. I think it's always been me. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. He shook his head, trying to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't possible. His son, a boy barely old enough to understand the world, was telling him things that didn't add up. And yet, the certainty in X's eyes made it hard to dismiss. What do you mean? Elon asked, his voice hoarse, the tension in the room palpable. What legacy? What do you know about it? XAE812 didn't answer immediately. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered object. It was a silver pendant, shaped like a strange geometric symbol, something that looked ancient, but also futuristic. Elon had never seen it before, but the moment his son placed it in his hand, he felt an odd shiver run down his spine. It felt familiar, as though it had always belonged to him, even though he was certain he'd never seen it before. This was my first clue, XAE812 said quietly. I found it in the attic a few weeks ago. It was hidden in a box with old family photos. I didn't understand it at first, but I do now. It's a key. A key to understanding what's happening. Elon turned the pendant over in his hand, staring at the intricate design. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol, a key to something far beyond his comprehension. His mind raced, trying to connect the dots. His family's history. The strange events in Greenland. And now this, his son holding the answers in his small hands. What is this? Elon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. XAE812 looked at him with a strange, knowing expression. It's a map. A map of sorts. A guide to what's hidden. And it's something that's been passed down for generations. It's not just for anyone. It's for me, Dad. The moment I touched it, everything changed. Elon's heart sank. Was this truly happening? Was his son the one who was supposed to unravel the mystery of their family's legacy? Was XAE812 tied to this power, this secret, this dangerous world in ways Elon couldn't even imagine? The boy's voice broke through his thoughts. I've been trying to tell you, Dad. They know about me. And they'll stop at nothing to get what's mine. They won't leave us alone until they have it. Elon's mind went into overdrive. Who? Who are these people? XAE812 took a deep breath, his expression serious. They're old. Very old. And they've been waiting. Waiting for me to be ready. I think it's time, Dad. I think we need to go. Before it's too late. Elon's heart raced, a wave of dread washing over him. This wasn't just a family secret anymore. This was a warning. Whatever had been hidden from him for so long was now in danger of being exposed, and his son was at the center of it. His protective instincts kicked in. He couldn't let anyone harm XAE812. Not now. Not ever. I'll protect you, Elon said, his voice low but fierce. No one will take you. I don't care who they are. We'll leave. We'll go somewhere safe. But XAE812 shook his head. It's not that simple. You can't outrun this. It's part of us. We have to face it. Together. Elon felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. The weight of what his son was saying sank in. This wasn't just a threat to his family's safety, it was a threat to everything he had ever known. His company, his legacy, his entire vision for the future, it all hinged on something he didn't understand. Something his son had known all along. What do we do now? Elon asked, his voice barely audible. XAE-812's eyes met his father's, and for the first time, Elon saw something he hadn't before, a deep, unsettling wisdom that made him question everything he thought he knew. We go to where it all started, XAE-812 said softly. We go to Greenland. As the night fell, Elon sat in his study, the pendant still in his hand, the weight of his son's words pressing down on him. He had never felt so unprepared, so vulnerable. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but they only led to more questions. And the answers, if they existed, were buried deep in a past he had never known. It was clear now that the journey ahead would be one he couldn't avoid. His son had unlocked something in him, a truth he wasn't ready to face. But there was no turning back. The legacy was real, and the time to confront it had arrived. And so, Elon Musk began to prepare for a journey he had never expected to take. One that would lead him back to the cold, mysterious lands of Greenland, where the fate of his family, and his son, would be decided once and for all. The plane was ready to take off as the first streaks of dawn began to light up the horizon. Elon sat in the private jet's cabin, the soft hum of the engines filling the otherwise still air. XAE-812 was sitting next to him, his small fingers gently tracing the silver pendant on his neck, the one that had become the key to unlocking their family's mysterious past. Elon couldn't help but glance at his son now and then, still unsure of how to fully process everything that had transpired over the past few hours. The boy had grown eerily quiet. It was as though he had already accepted the gravity of the situation, while Elon struggled to keep up. Are you sure about this? Elon asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. XAE-812 looked up from the pendant, his eyes meeting his father's with an expression that was beyond his years. It's the only way, Dad. We have to go to Greenland. It's where it all began. Elon nodded, though part of him still wanted to deny the strange reality that was unfolding before him. He had always believed that his own success, his work in space, his innovations with Tesla and SpaceX, were what would change the world. But now, it seemed that none of it mattered. There were forces much older, much more powerful, at play, and they were tied to his family in ways that defied explanation. As the jet soared into the sky, Elon thought about the strange warning from the woman in Greenland. She had told him that there were people out there, people who had known about XAE-812 for years, who would stop at nothing to gain control over him. What did they want with his son? What was this power that they were willing to kill for? The questions burned in his mind, and yet, there were no answers. Not yet. The landscape below began to change as they flew further north, the rolling green hills of North America giving way to the icy expanse of the Arctic. Elon's thoughts were interrupted as XAE-812 spoke again. Dad, he said, his voice low, I've seen them. The people who want me. I've seen their faces in my dreams. Elon turned to look at his son, startled. What do you mean? XAE-812's eyes seemed distant, as if he were seeing something far beyond the walls of the jet. They have dark eyes, Dad. Eyes that never blink. They don't speak, they just watch. They're everywhere. Elon felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just a child's fantasy anymore. There was something real about what his son was saying, something that transcended imagination. We'll keep you safe, Elon promised, though part of him wondered how much longer he could make that promise. As much as he prided himself on being a visionary, this was beyond anything he could have prepared for. The flight continued, the vast, endless ocean beneath them as they made their way toward Greenland. The hours seemed to drag on, the silence between father and son heavy with the weight of what was to come. Elon couldn't help but glance at XAE-812 now and then, wondering just how much his son understood about what was at stake. Finally, the jet began its descent. The icy peaks of Greenland began to emerge in the distance, the vast glaciers shimmering in the early morning light. It was a stark, barren landscape, a far cry from the sleek, futuristic world Elon had built for himself and his son. This was a land of secrets, and it felt as though they were about to walk straight into the heart of them. The jet touched down on a small airstrip just outside of Ilulissat, a town known for its proximity to some of the most remote and unexplored regions of Greenland. As the plane came to a stop, Elon's sense of unease only grew. There was something oppressive about the cold here, something that made the air feel thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Elon stood up and walked toward the exit, his heart racing as he prepared to face whatever was waiting for them in this desolate place. As he stepped off the jet, the icy wind whipped against his face, sending a shiver through his body. He glanced around but saw nothing, no signs of life, no welcoming party, nothing except for the endless expanse of snow and ice. "Where do we go from here?" Elon asked, his voice low as he scanned the empty landscape. XAE-A12 was already walking ahead, his small footsteps leaving deep impressions in the snow. Elon followed, his mind racing, unsure of what to expect next. "We follow the map," XAE-A12 said, his voice filled with certainty. "It will show us where we need to go." Elon glanced down at the pendant in his son's hand. The symbol seemed to glow faintly in the harsh light, as though it were alive. A strange feeling tugged at Elon's chest. It was as though the pendant were pulling them forward, guiding them to a place they weren't meant to find. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, the only sounds being the crunch of their boots in the snow and the biting wind howling around them. The landscape was desolate, almost alien, but there was something mesmerizing about it, something ancient that seemed to beckon them onward. Finally, they arrived at a cave, hidden deep within the jagged cliffs of the surrounding mountains. It was almost as though the cave had been waiting for them, its entrance barely visible among the rocks. "This is it," XAE-A12 said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where it all began." Elon felt a surge of adrenaline. He knew this moment was crucial. Everything had led to this point. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before stepping forward, into the darkness of the cave. Inside, the air was thick with age, the walls covered in strange symbols, ancient carvings that looked almost like a form of writing. Elon could feel the weight of history pressing down on him as they ventured deeper into the cave, each step taking them further away from the world they knew. "This is it," Elon repeated softly. "The legacy." XAE-A12 nodded, his small hand gripping his father's tightly as they continued down the narrow passageway. The further they went, the colder it became. It felt as though the cave itself was alive, breathing with them, waiting for something to happen. And then, at the very end of the cave, they found it. A massive stone door, covered in the same symbols that adorned the walls. It seemed almost like a gateway, as if it were meant to open only for those who were truly worthy. XAE-A12 stepped forward, the pendant in his hand now glowing more brightly than ever before. Without a word, he placed it against the door. The stone rumbled, and with a slow, grinding sound, the door began to open. Elon stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. What lay beyond this door? What would they find on the other side? As the door opened fully, a blinding light spilled out, and Elon knew, whatever it was, they were about to uncover the greatest secret of their family's past. And it would change everything. The light from the open door enveloped them, bright and blinding, yet it didn't burn. It felt almost welcoming, like stepping into a place untouched by time itself. Elon's instincts screamed at him to be cautious, to retreat, but he couldn't. His son had led them here, and there was no turning back now. The weight of everything they had uncovered so far pressed down on him, each step heavier than the last. XAE-A12, holding the glowing pendant in his hand, moved toward the light without hesitation. Elon followed, trying to steady his breath, trying to calm the rising panic that was threatening to take over. The moment they crossed the threshold, the air shifted. It was colder here, but not in a way that made the skin freeze. It was as if the very atmosphere held an ancient power, a force that hadn't been disturbed for millennia. The walls of the cavern were smooth, the stone oddly warm to the touch, despite the icy winds outside. They walked deeper into the chamber, and the light became less intense, revealing the space around them. Elon's eyes widened as they took in the scene. It was nothing like he had imagined. This wasn't just a cave or an underground passage. This was something else entirely. The chamber they stood in was vast, stretching out in all directions. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, each one a story, a piece of history, a warning, or perhaps a prophecy. At the center of the room, there was a stone pedestal, worn by time but still standing strong. Resting on top of the pedestal was something that took Elon's breath away, an ancient book, bound in what appeared to be some kind of unknown material. The cover shimmered faintly, and the symbols on it were unlike anything he had ever seen. XAE-812 stepped forward, moving toward the pedestal. The pendant around his neck pulsed in time with his heartbeat, glowing brighter as he approached the book. It was as if the two were connected, the pendant and the book, as though they were meant to be together. "Dad," XAE-812's voice broke the silence. "This is it. This is the key." Elon's heart raced. "What do you mean, the key?" XAE-812 reached for the book, and Elon instinctively stepped forward to stop him, but the boy's hand touched it before he could react. The moment XAE-812's fingers brushed against the cover, a wave of energy shot through the room, a low hum reverberating through the walls. The book opened on its own, the pages turning slowly, as if the book had a life of its own. Elon's eyes were fixed on the pages, now visible in the dim light. The symbols were more than just writing, they were a map, a guide, detailing the hidden history of their family. He couldn't understand all of it, but there were references to names he recognized, his ancestors, generations of Musk family members, each with their own cryptic notes, their own warnings. This is impossible," Elon muttered to himself, reaching out to touch the page. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot up his arm, sending a shock of electricity through his body. He yanked his hand away, eyes wide with shock. "What is this?" Elon whispered, his voice barely audible. XAE-812 stepped back, his expression one of quiet understanding. "This book was created for someone like me, Dad. It was passed down through generations, and now it's meant for me. The legacy, it's not just about what we've built. It's about what we were born to protect." Elon felt a knot tighten in his chest. Protect from what? Who? What are we dealing with here? His son turned and locked eyes with him. "It's bigger than you think. They've been watching us for years, waiting for me to come of age. There are people who will stop at nothing to use what's in this book. People who are after power. But it's not just about power. It's about control. Control over something ancient, something that could change the course of history." The words hit Elon like a punch to the gut. "Who are they? How do you know this?" "I've seen them," XAE-812 replied. "In my dreams. They've been coming for me. And they're getting closer." Elon felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just a warning anymore, it was a truth, and it was terrifying. The quiet, calculated life he had built, the innovations, the companies, the ambitions, were now all tangled in a web of secrets far beyond his control. A loud rumble suddenly echoed through the chamber. Elon's heart leapt into his throat as the ground beneath them trembled. The carvings on the walls began to glow faintly, as if reacting to something. He turned to XAE-812, who looked calm, almost expectant. "The time is coming," his son said softly. "They know we're here. They'll find us." Before Elon could respond, the ground trembled again, this time more violently. The walls of the chamber began to crack, pieces of rock falling to the floor. There was a deafening crash as one of the walls collapsed, revealing a new opening in the cavern. Elon's pulse quickened. He could sense it, the danger was real. "We need to go," Elon said urgently, grabbing Xae-812 by the arm. Now. But his son shook his head. No, Dad. We can't leave. Not yet. What do you mean, not yet? Elon demanded. This place is about to collapse. It's not collapsing, Xae-812 said, his voice calm. It's awakening. The walls continued to quake as a deep, resonating sound filled the air. Elon looked around desperately, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, as if the cave itself was alive, something extraordinary happened. The walls seemed to shift, and the floor began to open, revealing a hidden staircase leading down into the depths below. Xae-812 took a step toward the staircase, his eyes filled with determination. This is where it all begins, Dad. We have to go down there. This is what we were meant to do. Elon hesitated for a moment, fear gnawing at him, but then he saw the unwavering certainty in his son's eyes. Xae-812 was no longer the boy he had raised. He was something else, something older, wiser, and far more prepared for this than Elon could ever be. With a deep breath, Elon followed his son into the darkness. The unknown awaited them below, and there was no turning back. As they descended into the depths of the ancient stone structure, the sound of their footsteps echoed around them. Every step felt like they were getting closer to some final truth, one that would define everything that had led them here. The walls were etched with more symbols, the faint glow of the pendant casting eerie shadows across the stone. Elon's mind raced, the weight of what they were uncovering pressing down on him. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. But what would they find? He couldn't help but wonder if they were walking into something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And yet, he couldn't stop now. Not when his son's fate, and possibly the fate of everything they had worked for, was at stake. The answers, Elon knew, were down there in the darkness. And they would have to face whatever awaited them, together. The staircase spiraled deeper into the earth, and with every step Elon took, the oppressive silence grew more profound. The air was thick with the weight of something ancient, as though the very walls of the cavern were holding secrets long buried. The only light came from the pendant around Xae-812's neck, which glowed brighter with each step they took. Elon tried to steady his breath, but the feeling of dread continued to gnaw at him. What were they about to uncover? His mind kept racing, each question fueling his anxiety. This wasn't a normal adventure, no scientific discovery or space mission he could control. This was something personal, something that reached into the deepest corners of his family's history. How far down does this go? Elon asked, his voice echoing in the stillness. Xae-812 didn't respond immediately. His small face was etched with determination, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead, his every step purposeful. Elon, on the other hand, felt a growing unease. It wasn't just the uncertainty about the journey, it was the gnawing suspicion that they were being watched. Not much further, his son finally said, his voice a soft whisper that barely reached Elon's ears. This is where it all starts. Where the truth lies. Elon swallowed hard, taking in his son's words. He wanted to question what Xae-812 meant by the truth, but he didn't. Not now. The urgency in his son's voice was enough to tell him that the time for questioning was over. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The further they descended, the colder it became. Elon's breath came out in visible puffs, his fingers aching as they grasped the cold stone railing. His mind, ever the pragmatist, tried to make sense of what they were doing. This wasn't an expedition he'd planned for. It wasn't an engineering challenge or a space race. This felt personal, like they were venturing into something that would alter the course of their lives forever. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the staircase ended. They stood at the threshold of a vast underground chamber, the size of a football field, perhaps even larger. The walls of the cavern shimmered with veins of what appeared to be silver, glowing faintly in the dark like an ancient pulse. A massive stone door, covered in the same strange symbols that adorned the book, stood before them. Elon's heart raced as they approached the door. He could feel the power emanating from it. This was it. The moment everything would change. XAE-812 stepped forward, placing his hand on the cool surface of the door. The pendant in his hand began to pulse more rapidly, and with a low rumble, the door began to move. It groaned as if it had not been disturbed in centuries, the ancient stone slowly shifting to reveal a passage beyond. Elon's breath caught in his throat as the door opened fully. Beyond it lay another chamber, this one even more elaborate than the last. The floor was covered in intricate carvings, symbols, and designs that seemed to move when he looked away. At the center of the chamber stood a massive stone altar, bathed in an ethereal glow. "This is it, Dad," XAE-812 said, his voice echoing softly through the cavern. "This is where they hid the answers." Elon stepped cautiously forward, his eyes scanning the room. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the realization that they were in a place that had been forgotten by time itself. "What is this place?" Elon whispered, his voice barely audible. XAE-812 moved forward, his gaze fixed on the altar. "This is where they kept the truth. The truth about our family. The truth about the power we've been entrusted with." Elon followed his son, his pulse quickening with each step. "What power?" he asked, the question escaping his lips before he could stop himself. XAE-812 stopped in front of the altar, placing his hand on the stone surface. The pendant around his neck pulsed one final time, and suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. Elon staggered backward, instinctively reaching out for his son to steady him. "What's happening?" he shouted. But XAE-812 wasn't scared. His face was calm, almost serene, as if he had known this moment would come. "It's awakening," he said simply. The room around them seemed to shift, the symbols on the walls glowing brighter. The stone altar began to rise from the ground, slowly and methodically, as if something from within was pushing it upward. Elon felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. This was no ordinary discovery. They weren't just uncovering a family legacy, they were disturbing something that had been buried for centuries. As the altar reached its full height, the stone slab parted, revealing an opening beneath it. Inside the hollow was a golden chest, encrusted with gems, the lid ornately carved with more symbols. This chest was not just a treasure, it was something sacred. Elon's eyes widened. His hands trembled as he reached out, but before he could touch the chest, XAE-812 spoke. "Don't open it yet, Dad," he warned, his voice steady and calm, though there was an edge of something else in his tone, something urgent, something unspoken. Elon paused, his fingers inches away from the chest. "Why not?" "I'm not sure you're ready," XAE-812 replied, his eyes flickering with something Elon couldn't quite place. "There's more to this than just opening a box. What's inside, it's not just a gift. It's a responsibility." Elon took a step back, momentarily stunned. The weight of his son's words hit him with full force. Responsibility. This wasn't just about uncovering family secrets, it was about taking on a role that might be far greater, and far more dangerous, than anything he had ever imagined. "What is this responsibility, X?" Elon asked, his voice thick with emotion. "What are we dealing with?" For a moment, XAE-812 didn't answer. Instead, he placed his hand on the chest, just as he had done with the altar, and the room seemed to hum with energy. The symbols on the walls glowed brightly, and the temperature in the cavern dropped. It felt as though they were standing on the edge of something far beyond their control. "I don't know yet, Dad," XAE-812 said, his voice softer now. "But whatever it is, we have to be ready. There are people out there who will do anything to stop us from opening this chest." Elon stared at his son, his heart pounding in his chest. He was no longer just a father. He was standing beside someone with a destiny far bigger than his own, a person who held the key to a power that could change everything. The questions that had plagued Elon's mind for days were finally beginning to take shape. But the answers, they were still hidden. As he looked at the golden chest, a sense of dread and anticipation filled the air. This wasn't just a discovery, it was the beginning of a journey, one that would take them both into the heart of darkness. And Elon had no idea where it would lead. The golden chest rested on the altar, its glowing surface almost too bright to look at. The room seemed to hum with energy, the very walls vibrating with an ancient power. Elon stood motionless, his mind racing as his son, XAE-A12, stood before the chest, his expression intense yet calm. The soft glow of the pendant still pulsed around his neck, and Elon could feel a strange energy emanating from it, almost as if it were alive. What's inside this chest? Elon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He was filled with both awe and trepidation. There was something about this moment that felt both monumental and dangerous, and yet, he couldn't quite put his finger on why. XAE-A12 didn't look at him, his focus solely on the chest. I don't know yet, but I'm starting to understand what it is. The chest is a symbol, something that holds the past, the present, and the future. His voice was steady, but there was a quiet urgency in it that Elon couldn't ignore. Elon looked at his son, trying to grasp the weight of his words. What are you saying, X? What are we really dealing with here? For the first time, XAE-A12 turned toward him. His eyes, wide and filled with purpose, met Elon's. We're dealing with a legacy, Dad. Not just of our family, but of something older, something that spans generations, something that can't be undone. And it's up to me, and now you, to decide how it all plays out. Elon felt a chill creep down his spine. He could see the seriousness in his son's face, the weight of the responsibility he had been carrying for far longer than Elon had realized. They had been led here for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was much bigger than anything they could have imagined. The air in the cavern grew heavier as the seconds passed. Elon's mind swirled with questions, but no answers seemed to surface. The cavern around them seemed to close in, its walls narrowing, almost like the stone itself was pushing them into the unknown. It was as if the chest was a door, one that led to something far beyond the physical space they were in. A sudden rumble shook the ground beneath their feet, causing both Elon and XAE-A12 to look up. The glowing symbols on the walls of the cavern intensified, casting long shadows that danced across the stone. There was a sound, a low hum, vibrating through the very core of the structure. Do you hear that? Elon asked, his voice tense. XAE-A12 nodded, his hand still resting on the chest. It's starting, he said softly. The energy is waking up. It's tied to the chest. Tied to the pendant. And now that we're here, it can't be stopped. Elon's heart raced. What's happening, X? XAE-A12 closed his eyes for a moment, as if listening to something just out of reach. When he opened them again, his expression was a mix of resolve and fear. There's something ancient buried in this chest, Dad. Something that's been hidden away for centuries. And now that we've uncovered it, we're not just unlocking the past, we're waking something up. Something that could change everything. Elon's stomach turned. His mind raced back to the symbols on the walls, to the book they had found earlier, and to the warnings that had come before. This wasn't just a family heirloom. This was something much more powerful, and much more dangerous. The rumbling grew louder, and the air seemed to thicken around them. The pendant XAE-A12 wore pulsed brightly, sending a flash of light into the room. Elon squinted, trying to make sense of the light that seemed to form shapes, images, on the walls. Symbols, strange and ancient, appeared to dance across the stone, shifting and changing before his eyes. They're coming, XAE-A12 said, his voice low. They've been waiting for this moment. The ones who have been watching us, the ones who want the power that's inside this chest. They'll stop at nothing to get it. Elon's mind was spinning. Who are they? Who's after us? XAE-A12's face darkened. They're part of the same legacy, but they don't care about the truth. They only care about control. The chest holds something they want, something that could give them unimaginable power. A cold shiver ran down Elon's spine. His mind raced, trying to piece everything together. The people who had been watching them, the same ones who had been tracking XAE-812. The ones who were waiting for this moment. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that this wasn't just a race against time to uncover a family secret. It was a race to prevent a catastrophe. How do we stop them, X? Elon asked urgently, his voice filled with the weight of the moment. XAE-812 looked back at the chest, his eyes narrowing with determination. We have to open it. We have to unlock the power inside, but we can't do it carelessly. If we're not careful, it could tear everything apart. Before Elon could respond, a loud crash echoed through the cavern. The sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, came from the entrance. Someone was approaching. Elon's instincts kicked in, and he turned to XAE-812, who was already stepping back, his hand still on the chest. We don't have much time, XAE-812 said, his voice tight. They're here. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. Who? Who's here? XAE-812's gaze was steely. The ones who have been watching us. The ones who will stop at nothing to control what's inside this chest. The ones who will kill to get it. The rumbling intensified, and with it came the sound of more footsteps, closer now. Elon's mind raced as he looked at his son, trying to assess the situation. There was no more time for hesitation. They had to act. Whatever was inside that chest, whatever secrets it held, had to be unlocked, and fast. A figure appeared in the doorway of the cavern, cloaked in shadow. It was tall, imposing, and exuded an aura of malevolence. Elon's heart skipped a beat. Too late, the figure said, its voice cold and menacing. We've waited long enough. Elon stepped forward, his mind set. We're not handing this over. Not to you. The figure laughed, a low, menacing chuckle that echoed through the chamber. You don't understand, do you? It's not about what's inside the chest. It's about who gets to control it. XAE-812 stepped closer to the chest, his face hardening. You'll never control it. This legacy is ours. It's mine. The figure's smile widened, and it stepped forward, revealing its face. Elon's blood ran cold. It was someone he knew. Someone he had never expected to see here. The figure was familiar. And it had come for them. The figure in the doorway stepped forward, its face coming into full view. Elon's heart stopped as the recognition hit him like a blow to the chest. Amber, he whispered, his voice strained. Standing before him, with an eerie calmness that sent shivers down his spine, was Amber Musk, his own sister. But there was something different about her now. Her eyes were cold, almost lifeless, her lips curled into a knowing smile. She wore a black, hooded cloak that billowed around her, almost as if the darkness itself were a part of her. Surprised, Elon? Amber's voice was smooth, almost too smooth, like the calm before a storm. You thought you could keep this from me? Keep me out of the family secret? I've always known more than you gave me credit for. Elon staggered back, his mind reeling. His sister, the one person he thought he could trust, the one person who had shared their childhood, their dreams, was now standing as an adversary. It felt like a nightmare, a betrayal beyond words. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Amber, what are you doing here? Elon demanded, his voice shaking with disbelief. You've been watching us, all this time. Amber's smile twisted into something darker. You're so naive, Elon. You always were. I've been waiting for this moment, waiting for you and XAE-812 to lead me straight to it. You've been so eager to open that chest, to unlock its secrets, but you didn't realize that you were only ever pawns in my game. XAE-812 stepped forward, his small frame standing firm despite the tension in the air. You've been tracking us, haven't you? You've been one of them, one of the people who wants to control what's inside that chest. Amber's eyes flashed with something dangerously cold. Don't make the mistake of thinking you know me, X. I was born into this family just like you. But while you were busy playing the innocent child, I was learning what really mattered. This chest, this legacy, holds more power than you could ever imagine. And I, she stopped, her eyes narrowing, am going to be the one to control it. Elon could feel the anger rising within him, but he held it in check. The situation was too volatile for a rash response. He turned his gaze to XAEA-12, who looked unusually calm, his hands still on the chest. It was almost as though his son had expected this confrontation, like he had known that Amber would eventually show her true colors. Amber, you're not the only one who's been learning, Elon said, trying to steady his voice. You've crossed a line. This isn't about power. It's about truth. And you're willing to destroy everything for what? To control a legacy? To control the future? Amber let out a soft, mocking laugh. The truth? Oh, how quaint. Do you honestly think the truth will save you, Elon? It's too late for that. You should have known better than to think you could unlock the chest without understanding what's at stake. XAE-812's gaze hardened. I know exactly what's at stake, Amber. And I'm not going to let you have it. Not after everything you've done. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Amber's face. It was brief, but it was enough to make Elon wonder if there was more to her actions than just a lust for power. Had she been coerced? Was she being manipulated by someone else? The idea that his sister could be caught in a larger web of control gnawed at him. You think you can stop me? Amber's voice grew colder, the words dripping with venom. You don't understand, X. You don't understand what's inside that chest. You have no idea what kind of power it holds. It's not just about the legacy of our family, it's about the future of the world. Elon's pulse quickened. The world? What are you talking about, Amber? Amber's smile widened, her eyes darkening. The world has always been about power, Elon. We've always been told that it's about progress, about exploration, about understanding. But the truth is much simpler, it's always been about control. And now, with this chest, I have the power to take it all. Elon's stomach churned. You don't understand, Amber. You can't control this. This isn't something to be wielded. You'll destroy everything trying to use it. I already have, she said softly, her voice almost serene. I've already set the wheels in motion. You and X were always just part of the plan. Before Elon could react, Amber raised her hand, and the room seemed to shift. The symbols on the walls flared brightly, the air growing dense with an unnatural energy. A low hum filled the space, and the stone underfoot trembled. No! Elon shouted, stepping forward. Amber, stop! But it was too late. With a sudden, blinding flash, a vortex of energy erupted from the chest, sending shockwaves through the cavern. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and Elon felt the world around him begin to warp, as if reality itself was bending under the force of the power that Amber had just unleashed. XAE-812 reached out instinctively, his hand gripping his father's arm as they were both pulled toward the energy emanating from the chest. It was like nothing they had ever experienced, raw, untamed, and impossibly powerful. Elon looked up at his sister, who stood unmoving, her eyes glowing with a cold light. She was feeding the energy, using it to twist the very fabric of the cavern. This is the beginning, Amber said, her voice now distorted by the power surrounding them. The future is mine to control. You can't stop me. Elon's mind raced, but the swirling energy made it impossible to think clearly. It felt as though the cavern itself was alive, the walls pulsing with a force that was suffocating. His thoughts were hazy, and for the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. Elon gasped, we have to stop this. We have to fight back. XAE-812 looked at his father, his face set in grim determination. We will, Dad. But first, we need to understand what Amber has unleashed. We need to know how to control it before it consumes everything. Amber laughed again, her voice echoing around them. You'll never control it. It's already too late. With that, she turned, and the energy seemed to follow her like an extension of her will, coiling around her like a storm ready to explode. Elon's heart raced, but there was no time to waste. His family's legacy, the chest, the ancient power, it was all coming to a head. The only question now was whether they could survive the storm that Amber had unleashed, or if it was already too late. And as the vortex of energy continued to swirl, Elon realized one terrifying truth: everything they knew was about to change forever. The energy around them grew more intense with every passing second. The room trembled as if it were on the brink of collapse, the air thick with an unearthly hum that vibrated through Elon's bones. His vision blurred, and the light from the chest intensified, its rays almost blinding. The world around him seemed to be shifting, the ground beneath his feet becoming unstable. Amber stood at the center of the chaos, her eyes glowing with a strange, unnatural light. The power she had unlocked was not just a force of nature, it was something else. Something darker. Elon's thoughts raced as he fought against the pull of the energy. The chest, the pendant XAE-A12 war, Amber, everything was connected. This was the legacy they had been chasing, but now it was spiraling out of control. He looked over at his son, who stood beside him, his face determined, yet filled with an eerie calm that made Elon uneasy. We need to stop her, Elon said, struggling to keep his voice steady over the rising noise. We have to close the chest. We can't let this power run wild. XAE-A12 nodded but didn't speak. He was watching Amber, his mind clearly working at full speed, trying to figure out the next move. Elon knew that his son had a unique connection to the chest, something Amber hadn't anticipated. It was their only chance now. We can't stop it by brute force, XAE-A12 finally said, his voice low. Amber has control of the power. But if we can redirect it, we might have a chance to undo what she's done. Elon glanced at his son, trying to process his words. Redirect it? How? She's in full control. XAE-A12's eyes never left Amber. The pendant. It's a key, one that can either unlock or seal the power in the chest. I've been wearing it because I'm connected to what's inside. The only way we can stop this is by using the pendant to counterbalance the energy Amber has tapped into. Elon's mind raced. He had seen the pendant's power before, but he never understood its full potential. The connection between the pendant, the chest, and XAE-A12 had always been mysterious, but now it seemed like the only way to reverse the chaos Amber had unleashed. But time was running out. Amber was not waiting around. She raised her arms, and the air around them twisted, as if the cavern itself were folding in on itself, compressing everything into a singular point. The energy began to spiral faster, more violently. It's too late for you, Amber shouted, her voice distorted by the overwhelming power. The future belongs to me now. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't let this happen. His son was their only hope, but there was no time to waste. The chest's energy was starting to destabilize the entire cavern. The ground cracked wider, the walls began to crumble, and the light from the chest reached a fever pitch. Do it now. Elon shouted, his voice strained. XAE-A12 stepped forward, his hand clutching the pendant tightly, his eyes locked on Amber. His expression was hard, focused. With a deep breath, he raised the pendant in front of him, and the light around them seemed to bend toward it. The pendant flickered with energy as if it were alive, pulsing in rhythm with the chaos around them. The air was thick with tension. The moment XAE-A12's hand moved toward the chest, the swirling energy in the cavern seemed to stop. For a brief, frozen moment, everything went silent. Elon held his breath. Then, without warning, the light from the chest shot outward in a blinding flash. XAE-A12's body shimmered with the light, the pendant glowing brighter than it had ever done before. The energy bent and twisted, but now it seemed to be under his control. Slowly, the power began to pull back from Amber's grasp, moving toward the chest as if following XAE-812's will. "No!" Amber screamed, her voice shrill with rage. "You can't take it from me." Her hands reached toward the swirling energy, trying to grasp it, but it moved away from her, coiling around XAE-812 like a protective shield. Elon could feel the temperature drop, the air growing heavier as the balance of power shifted. The cavern itself seemed to groan under the pressure, the stone walls shaking. "Dad!" XAE-812's voice was strained, the effort clearly taking a toll on him. "I need your help. We can't do this alone." Without hesitation, Elon ran to his son's side, placing his hand on XAE-812's shoulder. As soon as their skin made contact, a shockwave of energy surged through him. The pendant's power surged again, this time filling Elon with the same strange energy that had overtaken his son. It was as though the pendant was fusing their energies together, amplifying their connection to the chest's power. The light from the chest flared even brighter, and the walls of the cavern began to crack, deep fissures running along the stone as if the very foundation of the world was crumbling. Amber's face twisted with frustration and fury. "No! You'll destroy everything," she cried, her voice breaking as she stepped forward, her hands outstretched. "You don't know what you're dealing with." But XAE-812's voice remained calm, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "This isn't about control, Amber. This is about balance." With one final, focused motion, XAE-812 brought the pendant down toward the chest. The energy swirled around him and his father, the power of the chest now flowing directly into them, its raw force seeming to pulse through their veins. It was overwhelming, and yet somehow, they were in sync, perfectly aligned with the chest's energy. In that moment, everything fell silent again. The blinding light that had filled the cavern slowly began to dim. The air cleared, the hum faded, and the tremors beneath their feet subsided. The energy that had once been spiraling out of control now settled into a quiet, almost peaceful glow. Amber stood frozen, her face contorted with disbelief. Her outstretched hands were now limp at her sides, and she seemed to collapse in on herself, the weight of the failure crashing down on her. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice hollow and broken. "You don't understand what's inside that chest. It's not over. It will never be over." But XAE-812's gaze was unwavering. "It is over, Amber. This legacy, this power, doesn't belong to any one person. It belongs to all of us. We just have to know how to use it." Elon stood beside his son, breathing heavily, the weight of everything they had just experienced pressing on him. The cavern, once so full of chaos, was now eerily still. Amber's outburst had come to an end, and the dark energy had been neutralized. But as Elon looked at his sister, no longer the confident adversary, but a broken figure who had been consumed by her own ambition, he realized something. This was just the beginning. The chest was only the first piece of a much larger puzzle. The legacy wasn't just about power. It was about understanding what it meant to wield that power, and what it could cost. Amber, now standing in the silence, seemed to shrink before their eyes. "You may have stopped me for now," she said quietly, "but there will always be others. Always more who want control." Elon looked at XAE-812, who met his father's gaze with a quiet resolve. "We'll be ready," XAE-812 said softly. And with that, Elon realized that this was just the first chapter of a much larger story, one that neither he nor his son could ever have predicted. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The dust of the cavern settled slowly, the air now still, almost suffocating in its calm. Amber stood, her back turned to her brother and nephew, seemingly defeated, yet still exuding an unsettling presence. Elon felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, though they had successfully neutralized the threat, the war was far from over. He could sense that Amber's defeat was merely a pause, a brief interlude before the next storm. "We can't let our guard down," Elon said quietly, his eyes still on Amber. "She'll be back. And we need to be ready." XAE-812, standing by his side, nodded, his face calm but his eyes filled with a depth of understanding far beyond his years. "I know, Dad." But Amber wasn't working alone. She never could have accessed the full power of the chest without help. "There's someone else out there, someone with a far greater reach." Elon's heart skipped a beat. "Someone else? Who?" X's gaze was unwavering, the pendant still hanging around his neck, glowing faintly with an energy that felt both protective and ominous. "I'm not sure yet." But Amber had a plan, and it wasn't just about controlling the chest. It was about unlocking a path to something else. Something much older. Elon's mind raced. His sister's obsession with power had always seemed personal, but now it was clear there was a deeper, more dangerous force pulling her strings. They hadn't just opened a chest of secrets, they had unleashed a legacy that had been waiting for centuries to reassert itself. Amber turned slowly, her face pale and drawn, the weight of defeat sinking into her features. She didn't look like the ruthless strategist who had faced them down only moments before. Now, she appeared broken, exhausted, and almost scared. "I warned you," Amber's voice trembled, but there was a bitterness beneath it. "You think you've stopped me? You've only delayed the inevitable." Elon stepped forward, his resolve hardening. "What are you talking about, Amber? You're done. We stopped you." "No," Amber's eyes widened, a look of fierce defiance overtaking the fear. "The chest, what's inside it, it's not just about power. It's about opening doors. Doors to places you can't even imagine. And the one who's waiting, they won't stop until they get what they want." Elon's stomach tightened. "Who?" Amber's lips curled into a bitter smile. "A shadow from the past. The one who's always been watching, always been waiting. He's closer than you think. He's always been right under your nose." Before Elon could respond, Amber's eyes glazed over, her voice growing distant. "He's coming for you, Elon. For all of you. You thought you could control it, but the chest, it's only the key. The key to awakening what should remain asleep." And then, as if the words themselves had exhausted her, Amber collapsed, her form crumpling to the ground. She was still breathing, but whatever strength she had left was gone. XAE-812 stepped forward, his face set in grim determination. "We need to get her to safety. We can't let her die here. If there's even a fraction of truth in what she said, we're not out of danger yet." Elon hesitated. He knew his sister was a threat, but at the same time, she was still his sister. There had to be something else, something deeper driving her, something more than just power. "Let's get her back to the compound," Elon said, after a long pause. "We need answers. And we need to be prepared for whatever's coming." Back at the compound, Amber was placed in a sterile medical room, unconscious but stable. The team had arrived shortly after, their faces grim, clearly aware of the severity of what had just transpired. Elon stood at the window, staring out at the night sky, his thoughts racing. What did Amber mean? XAE-812 asked, joining his father by the window. Who's coming for us? What was she talking about, the one who's waiting? Elon didn't answer immediately. The uncertainty was gnawing at him. Amber had been unpredictable, erratic, but what if there was truth in what she'd said? He couldn't afford to ignore it. His son was right, someone else was pulling the strings. And Amber wasn't the only one who had been chasing the power of the chest. Someone else had been manipulating the game from behind the scenes. I don't know, Elon admitted. But I've been around long enough to know that when someone like Amber says there's a shadow waiting, it's not just a warning. It's a threat. Just then, a soft knock came at the door, and one of the team members entered, holding a tablet. "Mr. Musk, we've found something," the agent said, his voice urgent. Elon turned, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" The agent handed the tablet over, and Elon scanned the screen quickly. It was a series of encrypted files, hidden within a compartment deep within the chest. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure they stayed secret. The files were old, decades, possibly even centuries old, and the contents were shocking. "These," the agent said, pointing to the screen, "they're blueprints, maps, symbols. But they're not just anything. They are connected to a series of events that go back to ancient times. There are references to a man, someone named Elias Magnus." XAE-812 stepped closer, his eyes widening. "Elias Magnus? I've heard that name before. It's one of the earliest recorded names linked to the legacy." Elon's mind raced. Elias Magnus. The name sent a cold chill through him. He had always assumed that the origins of the chest and the power contained within it were steeped in myth. But now, seeing the documents, the names, and the strange symbols, it was clear there was more to the story than he had ever imagined. "He's been around for centuries," Elon murmured, his voice darkening. "And if Amber's right, he's still out there. Watching. Waiting." A sense of dread settled over him. Elias Magnus wasn't just a figure from the past, he was a threat that could span generations. A shadow that had lived on in the background, always biding its time. "We need to find out everything we can about Elias Magnus," Elon said, his voice tight with determination. "And we need to be ready for whatever comes next." XAE-812 nodded, his face set in determination. "We'll do whatever it takes, Dad. I promise." As Elon stared down at the screen, a sense of foreboding crept over him. They had just uncovered the first piece of a puzzle that had been centuries in the making. And what lay ahead was far darker and more dangerous than he could have ever anticipated. Elias Magnus was coming. And when he did, everything Elon had built, everything he had fought for, would be at risk. They were no longer fighting just for power. They were fighting for survival. The hum of activity in the compound was constant. Teams scurried in and out of rooms, agents sifted through documents, and engineers worked tirelessly on securing the base against what Elon had come to realize was an inevitable confrontation. But amidst the frenzy, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Amber's cryptic warning was like a shadow that loomed over them, growing darker with every hour that passed. XAE-812 sat at a table in the operations center, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the surface. He was studying the documents they had recovered from the chest, his eyes darting across the maps and blueprints. His concentration was palpable, but Elon could see the unease in his posture, the weight of what they had uncovered was affecting him. "Anything new?" Elon asked, walking over and resting a hand on the back of the chair. X glanced up, meeting his father's gaze. "I don't know," he said quietly. "There are a lot of references to Elias Magnus. But he's not just some historical figure. This man, he was involved in some kind of secret order, one that was meant to guard something ancient. Something powerful." Elon raised an eyebrow. "A secret order? What does that have to do with the chest?" X looked back down at the documents, his fingers flipping through the papers with a sense of urgency. "I'm not sure yet. But these symbols, they keep showing up. And this." He pointed to a particular map, highlighting a location near the Arctic Circle. "This is where the chest was originally found. And where Magnus' order was based. There's a deeper connection here, one that goes beyond just the chest. This is about protecting something much more dangerous." Elon felt a knot form in his stomach. He had suspected that the chest was just the beginning, but now it seemed like they were standing on the edge of something far more treacherous. Something that could reshape everything they knew. Before he could respond, a voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Musk, you need to come to the command center immediately. We've intercepted something." The command center was a stark contrast to the quiet chaos of the rest of the compound. A massive screen displayed a map of the world, with various locations lit up in different colors. A team of analysts was hunched over computers, tracking movements in real time. Elon stepped inside, XAE-812 following closely behind. The lead analyst turned to him, his face pale with a mix of fear and confusion. "We intercepted a transmission. It's encrypted, but we've managed to decrypt part of it." Elon's stomach tightened as the analyst clicked a button on his keyboard, and the transmission began to play. The voice was distorted, but the words were clear enough. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. The legacy cannot be contained. Elias Magnus is awake, and the chest was only the beginning. The world will soon understand the cost of meddling with powers that were never meant to be disturbed." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Elon felt the weight of the words settle around him. Whoever had sent that message knew far more than they were letting on, and they were making it clear that this wasn't over. XAE-812's face was tight with tension as he looked at the screen. "Elias Magnus," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "He's not just a figure from the past. He's the key to everything." Elon ran a hand through his hair, trying to process what he had just heard. "It's a warning. A threat. Whoever sent that message is working for Magnus. They know we have the chest, and they're trying to scare us." "But why now?" XAE-812 asked. "What's so important about this moment? Why is Magnus coming for us now?" "That's what we need to figure out," Elon replied. "This transmission, it's not just about the chest. They're talking about the legacy. That means the power we've been dealing with is much older than we thought." Elon's mind raced. The chest had been a catalyst, but what if there were other pieces to this puzzle? What if the chest wasn't the only thing Magnus had hidden? What if there was something else, something even more powerful, that had yet to be unlocked? "We need to go to the Arctic," Elon said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts inside his head. "Whatever's there, it's tied to everything." A few days later, Elon, XAE-812, and a small team of trusted agents were on a private jet heading toward the Arctic Circle. The air was crisp and biting, the snow-covered landscape stretching endlessly below them. Elon sat in his seat, looking out the window, his mind spinning with the weight of what they were about to uncover. "We're close," XAE-812 said, his voice filled with both excitement and caution. "I can feel it. Whatever's out there, it's powerful." "I know," Elon replied, his voice distant. "But we have to be careful. If Amber was right, and Magnus is as dangerous as we've been led to believe, then we're walking into a trap." XAE-812 looked over at his father, his expression unreadable. "I don't think it's a trap. I think it's more like a reckoning." The plane descended through the clouds, and the cold, stark white of the Arctic landscape greeted them. The helicopter that would take them to the ground was waiting, its blades whirling as they touched down in a remote research facility that Elon had funded years ago. It was a place that had long been abandoned, hidden away from the world. The facility was large, built into the side of a mountain, and it had been one of the first places where the chest had been discovered. But there were more questions than answers here. Elon had always suspected that the research had been kept secret for a reason. The truth was, the chest wasn't the only discovery made in the region. They suited up in cold weather gear, their breath visible in the frigid air, and made their way inside. The heavy doors creaked open, revealing the dim, metallic halls of the facility. The echoes of their footsteps reverberated through the long-forgotten corridors. As they made their way deeper into the facility, a sense of unease crept over Elon. There was something here, something hidden, something powerful. The deeper they went, the more intense the feeling became, as if the walls themselves were closing in on them. "This way," XAE-812 said, pointing down a narrow hallway. They followed him, and at the end of the corridor, a heavy metal door stood, its surface covered in strange symbols, similar to those they had seen in the documents from the chest. "This was it," the heart of the mystery. XAE-812 placed his hand on the door's cold surface, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the door slid open, revealing a chamber beyond. Inside, a pedestal stood in the center of the room, and atop it was a strange object, a sphere, glowing with a dim, pulsing light. Elon's heart skipped a beat as he approached, his eyes narrowing. This is what Magnus was guarding, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. XAE-812 stepped forward, his hand outstretched toward the sphere. The legacy. It's all coming together now. And as his fingers brushed the surface of the sphere, a surge of energy shot through the room, and everything went black. The world was a blur of light and sound, an overwhelming rush that seemed to stretch time and space beyond comprehension. Elon felt his body tense as if he were being pulled in 1,000 different directions at once. There was a force, an energy, that flooded his senses, a force he couldn't control, couldn't understand. He tried to call out, but his voice was lost, swallowed by the vast emptiness surrounding him. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. Elon gasped, his lungs burning as he drew in a sharp breath. His eyes shot open, but the world around him was different. The chamber they had entered was no longer there. Instead, he found himself standing on a vast, barren plain, an endless stretch of cracked earth beneath his feet, the sky above dark and swirling with clouds that seemed to churn with a life of their own. The sphere, the glowing object from the pedestal, hovered in front of him, its light pulsing with a strange rhythm. He reached out instinctively, but before his fingers could touch it, the sphere flickered and vanished, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. Dad? Dad! XAE-812's voice echoed from somewhere behind him. Elon spun around, his eyes searching the barren landscape. XAE-812 was there, but something was different about him. His features were more defined, his expression intense and focused, as though he were not the same person Elon had just moments ago seen at the facility. Elon, a voice spoke, low, powerful, and unmistakably familiar. Elon's blood ran cold. He turned, and there, standing on the horizon, was a figure, tall, commanding, with an air of ancient authority that sent a shiver down his spine. Elias Magnus. The man was draped in long, flowing robes, his face obscured by a hood, but his presence was undeniable. He radiated an aura of immense power and knowledge. Elon felt the weight of his gaze, even though it was hidden, as if this man could see through everything, through him, through his thoughts, through the very fabric of the universe itself. You've come far, Elon Musk, Elias Magnus' voice resonated through the air, rich and deep, like a voice from the very depths of time. But your journey is only beginning. Elon's heart hammered in his chest as he stepped back, his mind racing. What is this place? Where are we? Magnus' lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. This is not a place you can understand with your limited perspective. This is the threshold, the space between worlds, where time and reality merge and separate. You have crossed over into the realm of the ancient guardians, the keepers of the legacy. And now, you are part of it. XAE-812 stepped forward, his eyes narrowed, his voice steady despite the overwhelming situation. What do you want with us? With my family? Magnus' gaze shifted to XAE-812, and a flicker of something like recognition passed across his face. Ah, so this is the child who carries the legacy. The one who holds the key to unlocking the future. I see the potential in you, young one. But it is not your time yet. XAE-812 took another step, his posture unyielding. We didn't come here to be part of your plan. We came here to stop you. Magnus' laugh was soft, almost mocking, as it echoed across the plain. Stop me? You think you can stop what has been set in motion for centuries? You are merely players in a game far older than you can imagine. But you are not without purpose, Elon Musk. Neither of you are. Elon felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he forced it down, trying to focus on the larger picture. What do you want with the chest? What is it that you're protecting? Magnus stepped closer, the ground beneath his feet shifting with each movement. The chest is a key, yes. But it is not the only key. It unlocks the door to the true power of this world, the power that lies dormant, waiting for those worthy enough to wield it. That power is what I protect. That power is what I will awaken. And you are the catalyst. XAE-812 clenched his fists. You're talking about destruction. You want to destroy everything. Magnus' gaze hardened, his voice growing colder. No, child. I am not a harbinger of destruction. I am the one who will bring balance to the world. The chest, the legacy, it is not a weapon. It is a tool. And those who are worthy, those who can harness it, will shape the future. Elon's mind raced as he absorbed Magnus' words. The legacy was far older than anything he had imagined, far more complex. Magnus wasn't some lone figure bent on chaos. He believed, truly believed, that he was bringing something necessary to the world. But Elon couldn't shake the feeling that what Magnus was describing wasn't just power, it was control. And that was a dangerous thing. How do you plan to do this? Elon demanded, his voice firm. What does all this mean? What do you want with my son? Magnus' eyes gleamed with a strange intensity. The key to unlocking the true potential of this world lies within your son, Elon. XAE-812 is the one who will unlock the legacy. He will be the one to guide the world through the coming transformation. Elon's heart sank. No. I won't let you use him. XAE-812 stepped in front of his father, his voice unwavering. I'm not a tool for anyone, least of all you. Magnus' expression shifted, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. We shall see, child. We shall see. Suddenly, the world around them began to shift again. The ground trembled, and the sky darkened even further. A gust of wind howled through the plain, carrying with it the scent of something ancient and long forgotten. Elon and XAE-812 both stumbled, their surroundings warping and twisting, the air thickening with a sense of impending doom. We need to go, Elon said, grabbing his son's arm. Now. But before they could move, the ground split open, and the world plunged into darkness. Elon awoke with a start, his body covered in sweat. His heart raced, the vivid memory of the strange, otherworldly realm still fresh in his mind. He was back in the facility, on the cold, hard floor of the chamber, with XAE-812 kneeling beside him, concern etched across his face. Dad, XAE-812 said, his voice shaky but steady. Are you okay? Elon sat up slowly, his head spinning. I don't know. What happened? XAE-812 helped him to his feet. You touched the sphere. We both did. It took us somewhere. A place that felt real but wasn't. Elon shook his head, trying to clear the fog from his mind. Elias Magnus, he's not just some man from the past. He's something more. And now, it feels like we've only scratched the surface. XAE-812 stood, looking down at the ground with a contemplative expression. We've got to stop him. He's right. I'm the key to unlocking the legacy. But I won't let him control me. Elon placed a hand on his son's shoulder. We won't let him. We'll stop him together. But first, we need to understand what this legacy really is. And what it means for all of us. They turned and began walking back toward the exit, the weight of their discovery heavy in the air. They hadn't just uncovered a piece of history, they had awakened a power that could reshape the very fabric of reality. And now, with Magnus more determined than ever to unlock the full potential of the legacy, their fight was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. The cold wind howled through the crevices of the abandoned research facility as Elon and XAE-812 exited the chamber. The chill was almost comforting now, a sharp contrast to the overwhelming heat they had felt in the strange realm. But there was no time to linger in the disorienting aftermath of what had just transpired. The encounter with Elias Magnus had opened a door, one that could not be shut. A door into a future neither of them were fully prepared for. Elon walked ahead, his mind still racing. That transmission, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. It wasn't just a warning. It was a call to arms. They know what we've uncovered. They're coming for us. XAE-812, walking in silence beside him, nodded slowly. I felt it, too. Magnus isn't just hiding in the shadows anymore. He's preparing for something. Whatever that sphere is, whatever it means, it's his way of pulling the strings. They made their way toward the helicopter pad. The storm had picked up outside, and the low, ominous clouds cast the world in a permanent twilight. The air was thick with the tension of an impending battle, and Elon could feel it pressing in on him from all sides. As they reached the pad, Elon looked back at the facility one last time. The building loomed over them, dark and silent, like a graveyard of secrets. What had started as an innocent search for answers was spiraling into something far more dangerous. They weren't just uncovering history, they were changing the course of the future. Ready? Elon asked his son, pulling him out of his thoughts. XAE-812 gave him a sharp nod, his eyes filled with determination. Always. The flight back to the main compound was tense. Both father and son sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but the weight of what they had learned hung heavily in the air. They had only scratched the surface of what Elias Magnus was planning, but it was clear that whatever was coming, it would not be easy to stop. Elon's mind kept returning to the same questions: what was Magnus really after? And why had he chosen XAE-812 as the key to unlocking the legacy? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain: the stakes had just become higher than ever. They touched down at the compound as night fell, the security lights casting long shadows across the ground. As they disembarked, a team of agents was waiting for them, their expressions grim. "Mr. Musk, we've got a situation," one of the agents said urgently. "We've intercepted more transmissions from Magnus people. They're moving faster than we expected." Elon's stomach tightened. What are they planning? The agent hesitated, then handed him a tablet with the latest intelligence report. They're gathering in multiple locations, places of historical significance. But the troubling part? They're looking for something that was hidden centuries ago. And we believe they're close to finding it. Elon scanned the report, his heart sinking as he read the names of the locations, places that had long been forgotten by most of the world. But they were all linked to the same ancient legacy. "The legacy is much larger than we thought," Elon muttered. "They've been preparing for this for centuries." XAE-812 stepped forward, studying the map closely. "They've got everything they need. The chest, the sphere, and now, they're looking for the final piece. We can't let them find it." Elon looked at his son, his expression resolute. "No. We stop them here. We gather everything we have, and we go after them before they can unlock whatever they're planning." Hours later, the compound was in full lockdown. Intelligence teams were sifting through every shred of data, tracing Magnus' movements, while Elon, XAE-812, and their closest allies began preparing for a journey to one of the most remote locations on the list, an island off the coast of Norway that had been the site of a mysterious historical event hundreds of years ago. It was there that they believed the final piece of the legacy was hidden. The island, known as Hostoi, was infamous in ancient texts as a place of great significance. Legends told of a powerful artifact that had been concealed there by Elias Magnus' predecessors, something so dangerous it had been buried for centuries. It was said to hold the key to not just controlling the legacy but to mastering it entirely. Elon stood in the war room, staring at the map on the screen. His hand tightened around the edge of the table as he considered their next move. "We're running out of time," he said quietly. "If Magnus reaches that island first, if he uncovers whatever is hidden there, he'll have everything he needs." XAE-812 joined him at the table, his eyes scanning the details of the mission. "We'll be ready," he said with certainty. "We can't let them win." Elon turned to him, his gaze intense. "I won't let them take you. We stop them before they can use you as their weapon." XAE-812 gave him a determined nod, though a hint of uncertainty lingered in his eyes. "I'm not a weapon, Dad. But I understand. And I won't let anyone control me." Elon clapped him on the shoulder. "We'll face this together." The next day, they were airborne again, this time headed toward the frigid waters off Norway's coast. The wind whipped through the helicopter blades as they neared the island of Hostoi. The sun was low on the horizon, casting the landscape in a cold, ethereal light. The island was small, surrounded by jagged cliffs, and it looked like something out of a forgotten myth, dark, foreboding, and cloaked in mystery. As the helicopter descended toward a clearing on the island, Elon's stomach twisted. Everything had led to this moment. They had come to stop Elias Magnus, but they had also come to confront the legacy, and whatever dangerous forces it contained. The landing was smooth, and as they disembarked, the cold air hit them like a slap in the face. The island was eerily quiet, save for the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below. The team gathered their gear and began moving toward the entrance of a cave that had been marked on the old maps they'd recovered. "Stay alert," Elon ordered. "We don't know what's waiting for us inside." XAE-812 was already several steps ahead, his senses on high alert. He had become the key, and the weight of that responsibility was clear in the way he carried himself, focused, determined, but always wary of the dangers that lay ahead. The cave's entrance loomed before them, its mouth dark and foreboding. Elon felt a chill run down his spine as they crossed the threshold. The air inside was thick with dust and age, and the deeper they went, the more the atmosphere seemed to press in around them. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, symbols that seemed to shift and change as they moved through the narrow passage. At the heart of the cave, they came to a large chamber. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, and on it rested a small, intricately carved box, much like the chest they had found in Greenland. XAE-812 moved forward, but Elon held up a hand, signaling for caution. "Don't touch anything yet." But it was too late. XAE-812 was already reaching for the box, his fingers brushing against the surface. The moment he made contact, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The air became thick with energy, and a deep rumble echoed through the cavern. "They're here," Elon muttered, his voice tense. From the shadows, a group of figures emerged, masked, cloaked, and moving with purpose. They had known they would be coming. Magnus' people had beaten them to the island. And now, the final piece of the legacy was within their grasp. The storm had gathered. And the battle for the legacy was about to begin. The tremors beneath their feet grew stronger as the cloaked figures advanced from the shadows, their eyes hidden behind dark, gleaming masks. The air in the chamber felt heavy, as though it were thick with some kind of unseen energy. The power in the room was undeniable, but whether it was an ancient force or something far more modern, Elon couldn't tell. What he did know was that Magnus' people were closing in, and the final piece of the legacy was within their grasp. XAE-812 took a step back, his eyes locked on the pedestal where the small, intricately carved box sat, still glowing faintly in the dim light of the cave. He looked over at his father, whose face was set with determination. "Don't touch it," Elon said firmly, his voice low and commanding. "We can't let them get their hands on it." XAE-812 nodded, stepping away from the pedestal. "We're not going down without a fight." The cloaked figures, now only a few feet away, stood in perfect silence, as though waiting for something. Elon could feel the tension in the air, the sense of impending conflict building with each passing second. "We don't need to fight," one of the figures finally spoke. The voice was low and unnerving, mechanical, as though the words were being filtered through some sort of distortion. "You've come too far to stop what is already in motion. The legacy cannot be controlled, Elon Musk. It belongs to us now." Elon stood his ground, his body tense and ready for whatever came next. The legacy doesn't belong to anyone. It's not a weapon. It's not a tool. It's part of something far bigger, and you're playing with fire. The figure tilted its head, as though considering his words. You misunderstand. This is not about fire, Mr. Musk. This is about fate. The legacy chooses its bearer. And it has chosen us. At that moment, the ground beneath them rumbled once more, and the sound of an ancient mechanism grinding to life echoed through the chamber. A low, rhythmic hum filled the air, and the pedestal where the box rested began to glow brighter, pulsing with a strange, otherworldly light. Elon's heart skipped a beat as he realized the truth. This wasn't just a simple relic. This was the final key. Move! Elon shouted. Without hesitation, he rushed toward the pedestal, but the cloaked figures reacted instantly. A burst of energy shot out from one of them, crackling through the air and striking the ground near Elon. He barely dodged, but the blast sent a shockwave through the cave, knocking him off balance. XAE-812 was already at his side, his face set with grim determination. We need to stop them, Dad. The figures advanced, but Elon wasn't about to let them have the legacy. Not without a fight. He grabbed a piece of broken stone from the ground and hurled it toward the nearest figure. It connected with a loud crack, but the figure barely flinched, its body shifting to absorb the impact as though it were made of something more than flesh and bone. Get to the box. Elon shouted to XAE-812, who had already begun moving toward the pedestal. Another energy blast fired from one of the cloaked figures, but this time, XAE-812 was ready. He held up his hand, and for a brief moment, the air around him shimmered. The blast hit an invisible shield of force, deflecting harmlessly away. Elon's eyes widened in surprise. What, how did you? I don't know, XAE-812 replied, his voice strained. But I can feel it, something in me, something about this place. It's connected to the legacy. Before Elon could respond, one of the cloaked figures stepped forward, its mask slowly raising to reveal a face he recognized, a face from his past. Elias Magnus' cold, calculating eyes stared back at him, though the man standing before him was far older than the one Elon had first encountered. Time had not been kind to him. His face was gaunt, his skin pale, and his eyes sunken, as though something had drained the very life from him. You think you can stop this? Magnus' voice was low and hoarse, his words carrying a sense of finality. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The legacy is not just a thing. It is an essence. It is the future. You're wrong, Elon retorted, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through him. The future is not yours to control. This is about choice, about free will. Not some power-hungry vision of the world. Magnus' lips twisted into a faint, sinister smile. You still don't see it, do you? This is not about choice. This is about destiny. And the legacy has chosen its path. It will reshape the world, whether you are ready or not. XAE-812's voice cut through the tension. It's not about destiny, Magnus. It's about what we do with the power we're given. We decide how to use it. Magnus' eyes flickered with a hint of amusement. You think you have the power to stop this? You're no different than the others before you. But you're too late. The key is already in motion. With a sudden, jerking motion, Magnus raised his hand. A wave of dark energy surged outward, crashing toward them like a tidal wave. Elon barely had time to react before he was thrown backward, his body slamming into the stone walls of the cave. Pain exploded through his chest, but he forced himself to focus, trying to fight through the dizziness. XAE-812 was still standing, though barely. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, his hands raised to shield himself from the blast. But the energy was overwhelming, and he could feel the force pushing against him, testing his limits. Get out of there. Elon shouted, his voice hoarse as he struggled to stand. But his son didn't move. Instead, XAE-812 stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable resolve. I'm not running from this. It's time to face it. Together. Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he watched his son step closer to the pedestal, the power surrounding him growing stronger. Something inside XAE-812 was awakening, a part of him that had always been there but had remained dormant, waiting for this moment. Stop! Magnus roared, his face twisted in fury. You can't control it. You're just a child. But it was too late. The moment XAE-812 touched the box, the entire chamber lit up with a blinding white light. The ground trembled, and the walls of the cave cracked as if the very fabric of reality itself was being torn apart. Elon could only watch in awe as his son, his child, held the final key. The legacy was awakening, and it was no longer about control, it was about understanding, about embracing the power and responsibility that came with it. The light grew brighter, filling every corner of the cave, until Elon was forced to shield his eyes. The world seemed to collapse around him, and for a fleeting moment, he wondered if they had made a mistake. Had they unleashed something they couldn't contain? But in the midst of the chaos, Elon realized something: this wasn't about stopping Magnus. It was about stopping the cycle, breaking free from the chains of destiny. And in that moment, as the energy of the legacy surged through his son, Elon knew one thing for certain: they were ready to face whatever came next. The storm had indeed gathered. But this time, they would be the ones to control it. The blinding light from the pedestal engulfed the chamber, casting long, sharp shadows across the walls as if the cave itself was alive. Elon shielded his eyes, heart pounding in his chest as the force of the surge of energy rippled through him, knocking him back to the ground. It was as if time itself had frozen, nothing mattered except the glowing orb that now seemed to hum with the pulse of the universe. XAE-812 stood at the pedestal, bathed in the unearthly light. His body was tense, the energy radiating from him almost too much to bear, but he held his ground. His eyes were wide, but there was no fear. In fact, for the first time in their entire journey, Elon saw a sense of clarity in his son. A sense of purpose that went beyond anything he could comprehend. The figures in the cave, Magnus and his cloaked followers, had been thrown back by the force of the energy, their bodies crumpling against the stone walls. But Magnus was already getting up, his movements slow, deliberate. There was something about him now that seemed different, his presence, his demeanor. He had always been a man driven by control, but now it was as if he were not just fighting for power, he was fighting for survival. XAE-812. Elon shouted, struggling to get to his feet. His voice was raw, the words strained as he tried to break through the chaos. You need to stop. This power is too much. You don't know what you're unleashing. But XAE-812 didn't respond. His face was stoic, his expression unreadable. He was caught in the grip of the power, and Elon could only watch, helpless, as the orb in his son's hands pulsed with each beat of his heart. Magnus, now upright and covered in dust, stepped forward slowly, his voice tinged with desperation. You fool, he snarled, his eyes locked on the orb. Do you think you can control it? It is beyond your understanding. It has always been beyond anyone's understanding. Elon's heart skipped a beat. Was Magnus warning them? Or was he trying to manipulate them into thinking they were out of their depth? Stop! Elon pleaded again. Whatever this is, whatever you think this is, you can't let it take you, X. It will consume you. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. The only sound was the eerie hum of the orb and the soft crackle of energy filling the cavernous space. Then, to Elon's disbelief, XAE-812 slowly turned toward his father, his eyes meeting Elon's with a look that was almost peaceful. I don't know what this is, Dad, XAE-812 said quietly. But I can feel it. It's not controlling me. It's guiding me. Magnus' lips curled into a smile, a faint flicker of triumph in his eyes. You see. The boy understands. The legacy has chosen him. It's not a weapon, it's not a curse, it's an awakening. And now, it's time to bring an end to this charade. Elon shook his head, disbelief clouding his judgment. You don't understand, Magnus. This thing, whatever it is, it's not meant to be wielded by any one person. The power it gives, it's too much. It'll burn you from the inside out. But XAE-812 held the orb in both hands, and as if responding to his touch, it began to glow brighter. The light intensified, and suddenly, the cave was filled with the deafening sound of rocks grinding against one another. The walls began to crack, fissures running along the stone, as though the very foundation of the earth itself was being torn apart by the energy being unleashed. And then, something happened. A figure, a shadow, appeared in the center of the chamber. Elon's breath caught in his throat as he recognized it. It was him, his own image. But not as he was now. It was an older version of him, a version twisted by time and power, eyes burning with ambition. The figure stood in the center of the chamber, the energy from the orb swirling around it like a storm. Do you see? Magnus said, his voice full of awe. This is what you are meant to become. This is the legacy, your legacy, Elon Musk. The power of the ages, the culmination of everything we've fought for. Elon stumbled backward, his chest tightening. His reflection, this twisted version of himself, was not him at all. It was a vision, a potential future, one where he had given in to the power of the legacy and allowed it to consume him completely. Is this what you wanted for me? Elon demanded, his voice raw with emotion. To turn me into, that? The figure of his future self did not speak, but its eyes bored into him, and Elon could feel the weight of its gaze like a hammer. A part of him wanted to fight, to reject the idea, but another part of him, one that he refused to acknowledge, was intrigued by the power that the figure embodied. Magnus stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the orb. It is not just your power, Elon. It is the power of creation. The legacy is the key to unlocking the full potential of the human race. You've always been on the verge of something great, and now you see it before you. You and your son, you are the last pieces of the puzzle. XAE-812's voice cut through the tension, steady but firm. This isn't what we're meant to become, Magnus. We're not meant to dominate the world or force it into our will. The legacy is not about control, it's about choice. It's about freedom. Magnus scoffed. Freedom, he spat. There is no freedom, boy. Only power, and those who possess it rule. You think your father, with all his great intellect and ambition, does not crave that same power? You think he is different from me? You are a fool if you believe that. Elon's gaze snapped to Magnus, his eyes burning with fury. No. You're the fool, he said, his voice rising. We've spent so much time trying to change the world, trying to make it better, not to control it. What you're suggesting is a path of destruction. You want power, Magnus? You want to be a god? Fine. But you'll never be more than a shadow of what you could have been. The figure of his older self flickered, its image shifting like smoke in the wind. As it wavered, Elon saw something in it, a warning, perhaps, or a realization. That version of him was not inevitable. It was a choice, a path he could still reject. You're right, Elon said, taking a step forward, his voice filled with a newfound clarity. I'm not like you, Magnus. And my son is not a weapon. This ends now. Before Magnus could respond, a powerful surge of energy exploded from the orb, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The figures surrounding them recoiled, thrown back by the force, and the walls of the cave began to crumble. Elon. X, came the voice of a distant ally, distant but urgent. Get out of there, now. Elon's heart raced as he turned to his son. X, it's time. We have to leave. Now. XAE-812 hesitated, the orb still in his hands, but the power that surged through him was undeniable. Yet, for the first time, he seemed to understand what his father was saying. With one final, decisive movement, XAE-812 closed his eyes and gently placed the orb back on the pedestal. The energy in the chamber began to dissipate, the light dimming and the ground slowly ceasing its violent tremors. For a brief moment, there was peace. But as the dust settled and the chamber grew still, Elon knew that this was far from over. They had made a choice. But the legacy, it seemed, was only just beginning to reveal its true power. The cave fell eerily silent as the final flickers of light from the orb faded into nothingness. Elon stood still, his chest heaving with each labored breath, and his eyes fixed on the pedestal where the object of unimaginable power had once thrummed with life. The ground was still trembling slightly beneath his feet, the aftershock of the energy's release still rippling through the earth. XAE-812 stood at his side, his face pale, but his expression calm, far too calm, given the chaos that had just unfolded. He looked up at his father, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange of understanding. They had made the choice to not embrace the legacy's power, but the weight of that decision was already becoming clear. The room felt heavier now, as if the very air was thick with the consequences of their actions. Magnus and his followers, however, were still recovering from the shockwave that had thrown them against the walls of the chamber. The cloaked figures slowly rose to their feet, their bodies battered but not broken. Magnus, who had been thrown the farthest, staggered up with a look of both disbelief and fury on his face. "You think you've won?" Magnus sneered, his voice sharp as he wiped blood from the corner of his mouth. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed, Musk. You think you can just walk away from this, but you can't. The legacy doesn't let go. You'll see soon enough. We'll all see." Elon's gaze was unflinching. He was tired, drained from the confrontation, but he knew this was far from over. Magnus wasn't a man who would easily accept defeat. If anything, this only fueled his obsession with the legacy even more. "We haven't unleashed anything, Magnus," Elon said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "We've rejected it. You think the power of that thing can control us? It's not about control. It's about what we do with the power we have, and we choose not to be consumed by it." Magnus let out a bitter laugh. "You don't get it, do you? It's already too late. The legacy is not just a relic. It's a force. A force that binds us all. You can't escape it. It's embedded in the very fabric of your being now." XAE-812 took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Magnus. There was something different in his expression now, a maturity that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just the child standing by his father anymore. He had faced the legacy, felt its power, and had made a choice to walk away from it. But Magnus didn't know that. Magnus didn't understand that XAE-812 had just become something more. "We're not like you, Magnus," XAE-812 said, his voice steady and strong. "And you're wrong about the legacy. We're the ones who decide what happens next. Not you. Not anyone." Magnus' eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "You think you can resist the pull of destiny? That's what you are, boy, a pawn in a game you don't even understand." The tension in the air was suffocating, but Elon could feel the shift. The words Magnus spoke were laced with fear, not confidence. He was losing control. And for the first time, it seemed like Magnus realized that he was no longer the one holding the power. The cloaked figures, who had been watching the exchange silently, began to circle them. Their movements were slow, deliberate, like predators closing in on their prey. They were waiting for Magnus' next command. They were waiting for him to make his move. But Elon knew one thing for certain, they weren't going to let that happen. Not again. Elon said quietly, his voice barely audible over the stillness, "We need to go. We've made our stand. We can't let them turn this place into a battlefield." XAE-812 nodded, but his eyes never left Magnus. The young man had the strength now, strength not just from the legacy, but from his own inner resolve. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the power in the pedestal, not of Magnus, and certainly not of whatever came next. "We can't let him win," XAE-812 said softly, though his words carried the weight of a final decision. "It's not just about us anymore. It's about everyone who's ever believed in the future we've been trying to build." Elon smiled faintly, a rare warmth in his eyes. "Exactly. This isn't just our fight. It's for all the people who are counting on us to make the right choice." With that, they both turned, preparing to leave the cave, to leave Magnus and the rest of his followers behind. But Magnus wasn't finished. Of course, he wasn't. He would never be finished until he had what he wanted. "You think you're free of me?" Magnus shouted after them, his voice echoing through the cave. "You'll never be free of me. I will find a way to claim what's mine. And when I do, you'll regret this decision. You'll regret everything." But Elon and XAE-812 didn't look back. They had already made their choice. And no matter what Magnus said or did, they would not be swayed. Their destiny was their own, and no one, least of all Magnus, could take that from them. As they stepped into the dim light of the cave's entrance, the sound of distant footsteps echoed in their ears. But it wasn't Magnus' followers. This time, it was something different. Someone different. A familiar voice reached them from the shadows. "Elon, you made it." Elon turned sharply, a sense of relief washing over him as he saw the figure emerge from the darkness. It was someone he hadn't expected to see, a face that had once been lost to the chaos. A face that had been a symbol of hope, even when all seemed lost. It was Kira. The last time they had seen Kira, she had been part of the team trying to decipher the legacy's secrets, working from the shadows to piece together the truth. Elon had thought she was lost, just another casualty of the war they had all been fighting. But here she was, standing before him, alive and as determined as ever. "What are you doing here?" Elon asked, his voice a mix of surprise and relief. Kira smiled, though it was tempered with a sense of urgency. "I came to help. I knew what Magnus was planning, Elon. And I knew that you and X would need more than just the legacy to stop him." XAE-812 stepped forward, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "More than the legacy? What do you mean?" Kira's smile faded slightly as she stepped closer, her eyes scanning the cave behind them. "The legacy isn't just a force for destruction. It's a blueprint. A map. And if we don't act quickly, Magnus will use it to reshape the world in his image. We have to stop him. Together." Elon's mind raced, piecing together what Kira was saying. The legacy wasn't just about power, it was about knowledge, about a deeper understanding of the world and how to manipulate it. And Magnus had already begun his plans to use it for his own purposes. "We have to act fast," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We can't let him control this. Whatever he's planning, it ends now." With Kira's unexpected return, a new sense of hope flickered in Elon's heart. They had just come through the first battle. But the war was far from over. They had one chance to stop Magnus, and they weren't going to let that slip through their fingers. The echoes of destiny had started to unfold, and it was clear that the stakes had never been higher. The journey from the cave was tense, every step they took feeling heavier than the last. Elon, XAE-812, and Kira moved in silence, their minds occupied with the weight of their decisions and the battle that lay ahead. The night was cold, the darkness of the world outside the cave contrasting sharply with the eerie glow that had once bathed the chamber within. But there was no time to dwell on the overwhelming events of the past few hours. The danger was still very real. Magnus and his followers weren't going to let them go so easily. As they made their way through the dense forest, the tension between them seemed to grow. Elon's mind raced with questions. How had Kira found them? What was her role in all of this? And most importantly, what did she know about Magnus' next move? How did you know where to find us? Elon finally asked, his voice breaking the stillness. Kira looked over her shoulder, her face partially obscured by the hood of her cloak. I had been following the signals. The same ones Magnus was using. I knew you would be heading to the cave. And I knew what would happen when you got there. XAE-812 glanced at his father, his brow furrowed. Signals? You were tracking us the whole time? Kira nodded. Yes. Magnus' network is vast, but it's not perfect. I've been monitoring his movements for months. I knew he'd try to get his hands on the legacy again. I couldn't let that happen without making sure you were prepared. Elon's heart clenched as he realized the extent of Kira's involvement. She hadn't just been a passive observer. She had been working from the shadows, gathering intel, anticipating Magnus' every move. It made sense. If she was part of the original team investigating the legacy, she would have known the risks involved and how dangerous it could be in the wrong hands. But why didn't you warn us sooner? Elon asked, the frustration creeping into his voice. Kira hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching the path ahead. I couldn't risk exposing myself. Magnus has spies everywhere. If I made a move too soon, he would have known. It was only when I saw the scope of what was happening that I knew it was time to act. I couldn't let you face him alone. Elon nodded, processing her words. He understood the necessity of caution, but the events had unfolded so quickly. One moment they were trying to stop Magnus, and the next, they were running for their lives, facing an uncertain future. I understand, he said finally. But we need to know everything. What do we do now? How do we stop him? Kira's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to break. We need to understand the true nature of the legacy. What Magnus is after isn't just power, it's control over something much larger. Something that could reshape the very fabric of society. XAE-812 stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with urgency. What are you saying? What's the legacy really for? Kira turned to face them both, her expression serious. The legacy is not just a source of power. It's a blueprint, as I told you earlier. It's a map, a guide to unlocking abilities that go far beyond anything we've seen. It can bend the laws of physics, alter perceptions of time and space, even manipulate the very essence of human consciousness. Elon's eyes widened in disbelief. You're telling me that this legacy isn't just some ancient relic, it's a way to completely rewrite reality? Exactly, Kira replied, her tone unwavering. It's been hidden for centuries, guarded by those who understood its potential. But now, Magnus has uncovered part of it, and he's determined to use it to create a world where he reigns supreme. He doesn't just want power, he wants to control everything. Elon felt a chill run down his spine. The thought of anyone, especially Magnus, wielding that kind of power was terrifying. But there was something more disturbing about Kira's words. If Magnus gets his hands on all of it, there's no telling what he could do. He could alter the course of history. XAE-812 shook his head, disbelief etched across his face. How can we even fight something like that? How can anyone fight that? We fight with what we have, Kira said, her voice soft but determined. We fight with knowledge, with understanding. The legacy isn't a weapon, it's a key. And if we unlock the full potential of it, we can use it to stop Magnus. But we have to be careful. We can't let it control us. Elon turned to his son, his eyes locking onto XAE-812's. There was a fire in the boy's eyes now, a fire that hadn't been there before. They both knew that their journey had just become far more dangerous. But they also knew that they couldn't walk away now. Not after everything they had already seen. Not after what they had learned. We need to get back to where it all started, Elon said, his voice firm. We need to find the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. Magnus is looking for them, and so are we. We need to stay ahead of him. Kira nodded. I know where we can start. There's an old facility, deep in the mountains. It's where the original research on the legacy was done. If there's anyone who can help us understand how to use it, it's the people who worked there. XAE-812 frowned. And how do we get there? We'll need to move fast, Kira replied. Magnus will be looking for us, and if we don't get ahead of him, he'll find the facility first. He'll have the advantage. And that's something we can't allow. Elon glanced at his son. We have to do this. We have no other choice. XAE-812 nodded. Then let's go. The group picked up the pace, moving quickly through the dense forest, their eyes constantly scanning for any sign of danger. The air was crisp, and the faint scent of pine mixed with the earthiness of the forest floor. But beneath the beauty of the landscape was a sense of impending doom. Every step they took felt like it was leading them into the unknown, into a battle for the very future of the world. As the sun began to rise higher in the sky, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The tension in the air was thick, and though they were still a few hours away from their destination, it felt like the walls were closing in on them. Every movement, every sound seemed to echo louder than the last, amplifying their sense of urgency. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the foot of the mountain. The rocky cliffs loomed above them, casting long shadows as the sun climbed higher into the sky. There, hidden in the depths of the mountain, lay the facility Kira had spoken of. This is it, Kira said, looking up at the entrance, which was barely visible through the thicket of trees and vines. This is where we begin. Elon took a deep breath, his hand resting on the edge of a stone wall that seemed to pulse with history. Let's find the answers we need. And then, let's end this. As they ventured deeper into the mountain's shadows, their resolve only grew stronger. They were facing the unknown, but they were ready. The true battle for the legacy, and for the future, was about to begin. The entrance to the facility was hidden behind a thick curtain of ivy and moss, as though nature itself had tried to reclaim what had once been a hub of cutting-edge research and innovation. The stone walls were weathered and cracked, but there was still an undeniable aura of mystery surrounding the place. Elon, XAE-812, and Kira stepped cautiously through the dense undergrowth, their footsteps muffled by the earth beneath them. Kira led the way, her steps confident despite the heavy air of uncertainty that surrounded them. She knew this place, knew it intimately, and Elon couldn't help but wonder how much she had uncovered in the years since the legacy had first been discovered. There was so much about her involvement in all of this that still felt like a puzzle missing pieces. As they approached the entrance, Kira reached out to push aside the thick vines, revealing a steel door that had been heavily rusted by time. It was clear that the facility had been abandoned for years, perhaps even decades, but the technology inside still held the potential to unlock the secrets they so desperately needed. Elon took a deep breath. Are you sure this is the right place? Kira nodded without hesitation. This is where it all started. The research team that uncovered the true nature of the legacy operated here. The answers we're looking for are inside. If we can access the mainframe, we'll be able to understand how Magnus is using the legacy, and maybe even stop him. XAE-812 looked around, his eyes scanning the environment as if he expected someone to jump out at them from the shadows. Do you think Magnus knows about this place? Kira's gaze hardened. He's been hunting for it for years. But he doesn't know exactly where it is. That's why we're still one step ahead. Elon felt a wave of determination wash over him. Magnus' desperation had been evident since they first encountered him. The man had sacrificed everything for the legacy, for the power it promised, and now, he was closing in on them. The stakes were higher than ever. If Magnus reached this facility first, it could be the end of everything. Kira reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device, which she held up to the door. With a quiet beep, the mechanism clicked open, revealing a dark hallway stretching deep into the heart of the facility. Elon and XAE-812 followed closely behind, their footsteps echoing softly in the silence. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of old machinery and forgotten technology. The walls of the facility were lined with faded maps and blueprints, yellowed papers pinned to the walls with once shiny metal tacks. But what stood out most were the large, imposing doors, each one sealed with thick locks and intricate security systems. This wasn't just a research lab, it had been a fortress, built to protect whatever secrets lay hidden within. Kira stopped at a central console and began typing rapidly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The faint hum of the machinery was the only sound that filled the room, the noise filling the space between them. "This is it," Kira said after a few moments, her voice tinged with both excitement and urgency. "The mainframe's still active. We can access the original research data." Elon stepped forward, peering over her shoulder as the screen flickered to life, displaying lines of code and data that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. But Kira didn't hesitate. She quickly navigated through the system, pulling up files that had been locked away for years. XAE-812 moved to Elon's side, his gaze fixed on the screen. "What does it say? What are we looking at?" Kira clicked through several files before landing on one labeled Legacy Blueprint. Her fingers paused for a moment before she clicked it open, revealing a detailed schematic of what appeared to be a machine. It was massive, far larger than anything Elon had seen before. The design was intricate, composed of intertwining mechanisms that seemed to defy the laws of physics. This was no ordinary blueprint. Kira's voice trailed off as she studied the screen. "This is it, the true nature of the legacy. It's not just a source of power. It's a system. A machine designed to manipulate reality itself." Elon's heart skipped a beat. He had suspected it, but seeing it laid out in front of him was different. This wasn't just an artifact or a relic. The legacy was a complex, living system, a machine capable of altering the very fabric of existence. Magnus' obsession made sense now. He wasn't just after power. He was after the ability to reshape everything. "How does it work?" Elon asked, his voice low. Kira scrolled through more data, pulling up notes from the original researchers. "The legacy operates on quantum principles, things like manipulating time, space, and even consciousness. The technology here is far beyond anything we have today. If Magnus gets his hands on the full system, he could control not just the world, but reality itself." XAE-812 took a step back, processing the enormity of what they were dealing with. "So, what do we do? How do we stop him?" Kira's expression darkened as she looked back at the blueprint. "We need to find the core of the system. The central control unit that governs the legacy. If we destroy it, we can neutralize the entire machine. But it won't be easy. Magnus will be looking for it. And he'll stop at nothing to get it." Elon's mind raced. They had to act fast. But first, they needed more information. They needed to understand how the legacy functioned, what made it tick. If they were going to destroy the central control unit, they had to know where it was, how it operated, and what kind of defenses Magnus had set up around it. "Do you have any idea where the core is?" Elon asked, his tone urgent. Kira nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the data once more. "There's a location. A hidden chamber beneath the facility, buried deep underground. It's where the researchers stored the most sensitive parts of the legacy. If the core is anywhere, it's there." XAE-812 clenched his fists, determination burning in his eyes. "Let's go then. We can't waste any more time." Kira turned toward the door, her face resolute. "This way. Follow me." The group moved deeper into the facility, their footsteps growing louder as they descended into the lower levels. The further they went, the colder it became. The walls were slick with condensation, the air thick with the smell of rust and decay. It felt as though the very ground they walked on was an ancient relic, slowly being reclaimed by time. As they reached the final set of doors, Kira paused, her hand resting on the cold metal handle. "This is it," she said quietly. "The core chamber. Once we enter, there's no turning back. Magnus will be close behind. We need to be prepared for anything. Elon looked at his son and then at Kira. There was no room for doubt. This was the moment. They had come too far to turn back now. The fate of the world rested on what they were about to do. Let's end this, Elon said, his voice firm. And with that, they stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever awaited them in the heart of the legacy. The door to the core chamber groaned as it opened, revealing an expansive underground room that seemed both ancient and modern at once. The air was thick with dust, and the atmosphere felt oppressive, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Elon, XAE-A12, and Kira moved cautiously inside, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. The vast space was dimly lit by a series of flickering, overhead lights. Strange metallic structures lined the walls, each connected by a series of wires and cables that pulsed with faint energy. In the center of the room stood a massive structure, something that defied description. It was like a machine built from a dream, complex, intricate, and alive with an otherworldly hum. The heart of the legacy. The central core that Magnus had been seeking. The machine seemed to be pulsing with energy, its strange blue glow casting an eerie light over everything around it. Elon could feel the power radiating from it, and it was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. This is it, Kira whispered, her voice filled with awe. The core. This is where it all begins. XAE-A12 stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the machine, a mixture of fear and curiosity in his gaze. Is this really it? The thing Magnus wants? Kira nodded grimly. Yes. It's the key to everything. Control over time, space, and consciousness. It's everything Magnus ever dreamed of, and more. If we can destroy it, we destroy his power. Elon's mind was racing. The enormity of what they were about to do was almost too much to comprehend. If they failed, Magnus would seize control of the legacy, and there would be no stopping him. But if they succeeded, they could stop the madness before it even began. The hum of the machine grew louder, and the floor beneath their feet began to vibrate slightly. Elon's heart rate quickened. How do we destroy it? He asked, his voice low. Kira stepped forward, examining the central control panel that was embedded in the machine. I've studied the blueprints. There's a fail-safe, a shutdown protocol hidden in the system. If we activate it, the core will overload, and everything will come to an end. But it's not that simple. The core is connected to Magnus' network. The moment we activate it, he'll know. XAE-A12 looked at her, his face pale. So, we'll have to face him. Head on. Kira's expression hardened. Yes. We need to be ready for anything. Just as she finished speaking, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. The heavy clank of boots on metal floors. A cold, unsettling voice echoed through the room, sending a chill down their spines. I knew you'd come here eventually, Magnus' voice boomed, its echoes reverberating off the walls. You've been a nuisance from the beginning, but this is where it ends. Elon's heart sank. Magnus had found them. A shadowy figure stepped into the doorway at the far end of the room, silhouetted by the dim light. His face was obscured by the shadow of his hood, but his presence was undeniable. The man who had obsessed over the legacy. The man who had driven them all to this moment. You've made a terrible mistake, Magnus continued, stepping forward. His eyes were cold, and his smile was twisted. This is mine. I've worked too long, sacrificed too much, to let you destroy it now. Kira's hand went to the small device at her waist. We're not going to let you have it. Magnus' eyes narrowed, his smile vanishing as he raised one hand. You think you can stop me? You're too late. I control the legacy now. You're just a distraction. The room seemed to grow colder as he spoke, the air thick with tension. Elon could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Magnus had already integrated himself with the system. He was part of it. If they failed here, they would be giving him everything he wanted. Kira moved quickly, her fingers flying over the control panel in an attempt to activate the failsafe. The machine hummed louder, its energy growing more intense. But before she could finish, a blinding light shot from the core, surrounding them in a cascade of blue energy. The shockwave knocked them back, and Elon stumbled to the ground. No! Kira screamed, struggling to rise to her feet. It's trying to stop us. Magnus laughed darkly, his form becoming clearer as he stepped toward them. You cannot defeat me. You cannot defeat the legacy. Elon pushed himself to his feet, his mind racing. The legacy was fighting back, defending itself against their attempts to shut it down. They had to find a way around it, fast. XAE-812. Elon shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. We need to work together. Help her. XAE-812's face was grim, but determination filled his eyes. He nodded quickly and moved toward Kira's side, helping her stabilize the panel. The energy from the core surged again, and this time, it felt different. It felt like the machine was alive, aware of their every move. Elon glanced at Magnus, who was still advancing toward them, a look of pure contempt on his face. The man had already merged with the legacy. He was no longer just a man, he was a part of something far bigger. Far more dangerous. You're too late, Magnus repeated, his voice becoming a low growl. The legacy has chosen me. It will never allow you to destroy it. I am its master now. Elon's chest tightened. They had to stop him. They had to finish this, or Magnus would reshape the world into something unrecognizable. With one final glance at his son and Kira, Elon took a deep breath. We do this together. Let's end this. Kira pressed a final series of commands into the control panel. The machine's hum grew to a deafening crescendo, and then, silence. The core flickered, its blue light flickering in a slow, rhythmic pulse. The fail-safe had been activated. Magnus' eyes widened in disbelief. No. No. A violent surge of energy exploded from the core, sending shockwaves through the room. The walls of the facility shook, and the lights above them flickered erratically. The legacy, in its final moments, began to tear itself apart. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp and shift around them. Elon felt the ground beneath him tremble as the core began to destabilize. Get out! Now, he shouted. But Magnus was already moving, his form shifting unnaturally as he tried to draw power from the disintegrating machine. A violent storm of energy swirled around him, threatening to consume everything in its path. Elon and XAE-812 grabbed Kira, pulling her toward the exit as the facility began to collapse. The walls cracked and split, the once imposing structure falling apart as the legacy's control disintegrated. The core was gone, its power no longer flowing through Magnus. But the destruction it caused was all-consuming. They ran, their footsteps echoing in the chaos. Behind them, the sound of the facility's collapse grew louder, and Elon knew they couldn't outrun it forever. But they had done it. The legacy was gone. Magnus was defeated. As they emerged from the depths of the mountain, the sunlight hit their faces, and the world outside seemed unchanged. But the truth was clear, they had won. The legacy was no longer a threat, and the world was safe. For now. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?